welcome to the stage Marshall Albright, President and CEO of Cass County Electric Cooperative. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Marshall Albright, President and CEO of Cass County Electric Cooperative.
Good morning, everyone. If you could find your seats, we'll get the program rolling here. Welcome to the Midwest Economic Outlook Summit. I am Marshall Albright, President and CEO of Cass County Electric Cooperative, one of the presenting sponsors of the Midwest Summit. We have an exciting lineup of speakers this morning. As you see in your program, we are joined by Anil Kashkari, President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, statewide officials, economic thought leaders, and industry experts. Before we dive into this morning's program, I would first like to thank the sponsors and co-hosts that made this event possible. First, this morning's co-presenting sponsor, Bremer Bank. Additionally, our news media sponsor, Inform. And our silver sponsors, Bank of North Dakota, Dakota Carrier Network, Delta by Marriott, First International Bank and Trust, First Western Bank and Trust, Gate City Bank, Heartland Trust, MSUM, NDSCS, Otter Tail Power Corporation, Sanford Health, Starion Bank, U.S. Bank, Wanza Construction, and Wells Fargo Bank. Additionally, our media sponsor, MWC Advertising of Fargo-Moorhead. And our corporate sponsors, which are now shown on the screen, thank you all for your support of this fantastic event. Finally, I would like to thank our production sponsor, Livewire. Now, I would like to recognize our co-hosting chambers of commerce across North Dakota, Minnesota, and South Dakota. This Midwest Summit was a true collaboration of 24 chambers that are broadcasting this content into their communities. Thank you all of our chambers for this strong partnership. Let's give all our sponsors and co-hosts that made this event possible a round of applause. As we get started this morning, I would like to once again thank you all for joining us in person and virtually. We have a packed agenda this morning, so you're welcome to help yourselves to refreshments on either side of the room or use restrooms in the entryway during the program. Throughout the event, we will be hosting multiple question and answer sessions with our keynote and industry speakers. Please submit your questions to chamberquestions.com using the QR code on your table. I don't have that sheet in front of me, but it's on your table. Or raise your hand and a staff member will bring a microphone over for you shortly. Now what you've been waiting for. To introduce our first keynote speaker, I would like to introduce Gene Crane, President and CEO of Bremer Financial Corporation. Bremer is a $15 billion financial services organization with locations in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota. Please welcome to the stage, Gene Crane.
The true value of a banking relationship isn't measured in dollars and cents or months and years. It's measured in trust, earned by helping you anticipate, adjust, grow, and thrive through changes. At Bremer Bank, we understand that it's not always possible to know what the future holds, but we'll be ready to help you make the most of it, no matter what.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jean Crane, President and CEO of Bremer Financial Corporation. We are a community bank headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we are so proud of our presence here in North Dakota. We are growing, and we are really proud to be the sponsor of this event. I'm here with you today to introduce, and really honored to introduce, Neel Kashkari. Neel is the President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis is one of the 12 regional banks serving a district that includes Montana, North and South Dakota, Minnesota, parts of northern Wisconsin, and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Neel serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, and he brings the 9th District's perspective to monetary policy discussions in Washington, D.C. In addition to his responsibilities as a policymaker, Kashkari also oversees operations of the whole bank, which includes supervision and regulation, treasury services, and payment services. Neel has held a variety of roles in public service and in finance, and most notably, he was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the 2008 financial crisis. And with that, he oversaw the Troubled Asset Relief Program, which we all know as TARP. Following his tenure in Washington, Neel returned to California in 2009, and there he joined PIMCO. And in the role there, he was managing director and a member of their executive offices. He left that firm in 2013 to explore returning to public service, and in 2014 ran for governor of California on a platform that focused on economic opportunity. Neel was raised in Ohio. He earned his bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois and his MBA from Wharton. I have the distinct personal privilege of serving with Neel on the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis Board of Directors, and I know we will all really enjoy hearing from him today. Welcome, Neel.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be with you today. It's so nice to be back in person after 2 years. This is my first one of these doing after 2 years. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes and then turn it over to Kurt. We're going to have a discussion, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some Q&A. And I hope you, I've been to North Dakota a bunch of times, so North Dakotans generally are not shy. I hope you are not shy. I'd love to hear from you and fire away what's on your mind and what you'd like to know about or what you're seeing in your communities. Let me just start by telling you why I'm here and why the Minneapolis Fed is here. In 1913, the United States Congress created the Federal Reserve System, which is our nation's central bank. But Congress did something unique. They said we don't simply want it in the nation's capital. We want it distributed all the way around the country so that the different regions of the country have a direct voice in the policymaking process. So they created 12 independent Federal Reserve banks, the 9th of which is the Minneapolis Fed. And our jobs are to represent you. Our jobs are to represent this region, which is Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Montana, the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and northwestern Wisconsin. So a big part of our jobs is to spend our time traveling around the district, we call it the district, to hear from you about what's happening in your local economy. And then I go back to Washington, D.C. every 6 weeks for Federal Open Market Committee meetings. And part of what I'm doing in those meetings is talking about what's happening here in our regional economy. So meetings like this, I've got a day full of events here. They're really good for me to be able to hear directly from folks what's happening in the regional economy. Now, we cannot set a different monetary policy or a different interest rate for North Dakota and for California or for New York because we all use the same dollar. So it's one interest rate for the whole country. But we want to try to pick that monetary policy that's the best we can for the country as a whole, and making sure that our region is part of that process and part of that deliberation is literally my job. And so I appreciate you being here today. Let me just spend a couple minutes on what's going on in the economy. I'm sure it's top of mind for folks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, and we're going to have a good discussion. Obviously, inflation is very high right now. big surprise, at least for me, that inflation has gotten this high and stayed this high for as long as it has. You know, the U.S. economy went through a rapid shutdown, much of it, I know less so in North Dakota because of COVID, and has now been reopening, and that reopening has been uneven. Basically, demand has picked up more quickly than supply has been able to catch up. And so 6 months or so ago, I thought, well, this is probably going to be a temporary phenomenon that we're seeing because supply chains are going to get sorted out, people are going to come back to work, that's going to give businesses the workers that they need, and then you'll start to see supply return. At the same time, I expected demand to normalize. You know, when much of the US economy was shut down, you couldn't go out to restaurants, people were not traveling, they weren't going to hotels. So what were people doing? They were either saving a lot of money, or they were spending it on goods rather than on services. Cars, washers and dryers, gym equipment for your home because your gym might have been closed. So if you looked at the economic data, goods consumption went way up and services consumption went down. Well, that seems like that should be a temporary phenomenon, and as the economy reopens, that'll go back to normal. Interestingly, that hasn't happened. The goods consumption has stayed elevated while services consumption has picked up. That's not what I expected to see. And so that tells me, okay, that's part of the inflation story. Maybe that's going to normalize and goods will come back down as services fully recovers, or maybe it's going to be sustained. We just don't know right now. So about 6 months ago, the Federal Open Market Committee started adjusting what we call forward guidance, adjusting how we are likely going to set interest rates in the future. And now we've done the first interest rate increase last week, and we've signaled we expect will probably be 6 more this year, 25 basis point increases. It could be more, could be less. I think that I penciled in my forecast that we'd have 7 this year, but it's really going to depend on the economic data. If some of these imbalances that I described start to sort themselves out in the next few months, and I hope they do, then maybe we won't need as many. But if they don't, and if the high inflation is sustained and there continue to be worker shortages around the country, then maybe we'll end up having to do more. You know, we will have to see how the data evolves. But I've certainly shifted my views quite dramatically in the past 6 months. The committee has moved quite aggressively. And the one thing everybody should know is 100% of the people on the Federal Open Market Committee are committed to us getting back to our 2% inflation target. There's no disagreement about that. All of us, you know, we have different views on what it's going to take to get there, but we are all committed to watching the data and adjusting what we need to do based on what happens in the economy. And so that's where we are. It's an uncertain time, and obviously everything that's happening in Ukraine, the tragedy in Ukraine, is making all of these problems worse because you've got high oil prices, high commodity prices, supply chains that are potentially affected by that. That makes this an even more challenging problem, but we're going to tackle it. So with that quick overview, I hope that sets the groundwork. Kurt, over to you.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and good morning. And thank you, President Kashkari, for coming away. As the president said, congratulations, everybody. Doesn't this feel great? A round of applause for yourselves for being here. Come on. We're back in person. And as Shannon mentioned, to the 24 other chambers that are joining us online, another phenomenal opportunity. My kudos, having been in public service for a long time, watching what the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber is doing from an innovation standpoint, bringing in chambers from all over the Midwest to share, to listen, those that maybe are back in service and can't be here, but having this online and being able to access this after the effect is fantastic. So as Shannon said, my name is Kurt Zellers. I'm the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for Primacy Strategy Group. We're a public affairs and lobbying firm here in Bismarck, as well as in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C., and just in opening up in South Dakota. My primary job is working on public policy and the public relations and media relations side, but also, nightlight as a host for events like this. So when the opportunity came up to work and interview President Kashkari, even before the Russian invasion, I jumped at the chance. Now, with interest rates, the invasion, the world stage as it is, we're going to settle in here for about 2.5 hours. So hopefully you guys got enough coffee. Oh, you guys aren't quite awake yet for my good dad jokes. We're going to get as much as we can. As I said before, there are going to be microphones around the room here, so if you have a question, please raise your hand in advance so that everybody doesn't rush to get to the end. And then for online folks, make sure and put that into the queue. Catherine or Kale will be able to get those questions up to us so we can start and make sure. But I'm going to ask a few big basic questions to get us going, but really do want to hear from the crowd. So please, as you're looking around the room, look for those microphones. The state of the economy in general, you led right into what I'd like to start with, is those interest rates. I read there was an article in the Star Tribune just last weekend. You had been pretty adamant and pretty, not, I don't want to say, concrete on it, but you've been opposed to those rate increases. What was that change? You alluded to it a little bit, but what was that change that you saw that made you think that needed to be done? And then you kind of led into how long this could take. Where do you see that supply chain? Is that the number one thing that's holding things up, or is it just a combination of everything?
Well, it's a combination of a lot of things. So one thing that for the last 5 or 6 years before the pandemic, we kept thinking that, oh my gosh, we're at full employment or maximum employment. All the Americans who want to work have jobs. And then we kept getting surprised as more and more Americans were coming off the sidelines and taking jobs. Or, excuse me, folks that we thought would retire didn't retire. They said, I'm going to work for a few more years. That's really good for the US economy. The more Americans that are working, the higher our productive capacity. So we kept getting faked out by the US economy. Turns out we were not at full employment. There were more workers there. And then the pandemic hit. Many Americans lost their jobs. Many Americans left the workforce. And 9 months ago or so, we were probably missing 4 or 5 million workers from the workforce, or where we should have been if there had been no pandemic. And people pointed to a lot of different factors. They pointed to unemployment benefits that were generous, that were, some people said, oh, this is incentivizing people not to come back. Well, those expired in August or September of last year. We had schools around the country that were closed, which created huge childcare challenges for families, especially with young children. That was keeping some people out of the workforce. And then there was fear of COVID. Just people were nervous about getting sick. And so schools then reopened. The unemployment benefits expired. COVID vaccines became more widely available. And we did start to see more and more workers come back in. So part of what I was arguing was, let's not shortchange the American worker. I believe the vast majority of Americans want to work. I believe they will come back if given the chance. Now, they have come back, right? In the last 6 months, the US economy has created about 580,000 jobs a month. That is really strong job growth. So that's been positive, yet it's not been enough to keep inflation in check. And so I think it's just a constellation of all of that data that got me and my colleagues to say, okay, this is not evolving exactly as we expected, and so we need to adjust. In terms of supply chain, 6 months or so ago, my economists and I did a round of calls with some of the biggest businesses that are headquartered in this region, global companies, and they're all name brands that you know, that have operations all around the world. And I asked the CEOs and the head of supply chains, what's going on in your supply chains? And they said, it's not getting better. They said, every time we put out a fire in one market, something else burns somewhere else. And we are just, it's like whack-a-mole. And I said, well, when do you think it's going to get better? And they said, we're guessing, not in 2022, maybe in 2023, but who knows? And that also opened my eyes that, oh my gosh, this is going to last longer than I expected. And the data just keeps coming in that direction, and so of course we have to respond.
So 2 follow-ups to the supply chain, the Great Resignation, as some of the media call it, and then how is automation going to play a part of that? I heard an ad on the drive up here yesterday that it was Quick Trips. If you are a sponsor, congratulations, you got bonus advertising. But talking about drivers making $93,000 a year, $93,000 a year to do delivery routes. Is the supply chain and that Great Resignation, is that going to kind of fast forward? Are we going to see driverless semis on the road next year? Will that be 2023, 2024, or will the worker eventually come back, or will that market adjust? And again, if you get paid $100,000 to do route delivery for a Quick Trip or for Super America, so I make sure equal advertising there, is that going to be a part of this new change then in what you're seeing?
As the economy has gotten strong and workers have more choices, and by the way, that's a good thing. Like the highest wage increases we are seeing are for the lowest income workers. These are folks who are long overdue for a raise. I'm glad they have more choices than they had before. I think you are seeing a churning in the labor market. I don't really buy this great resignation story. I think you're seeing a great job switching story, which is people are switching away from the toughest jobs to more attractive jobs. One thing I hear from all the big businesses that I talk to is, oh my gosh, we can't get long haul truckers. Yeah, that's a tough job to be a long haul trucker because you're away from home for a week. But you are seeing more people hired in local delivery because that's a better job. Guess what? You get to sleep in your own bed. You get to be with your family. Another job that's really tough but really important are childcare workers, right? I've got 2 young children, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. Childcare workers are profoundly important to our society. They're also paid really, really poorly. And so as they look at, well, I can go to Walmart or I can go to Target and I can make 13 or 15 bucks an hour, and that's an easier job, why don't I go do that? And so you're seeing a churn away from the toughest jobs into more attractive jobs, not more important jobs, but more attractive jobs. And so society's gonna have to adjust because we still need long haul truckers, and as much as Silicon Valley promises us it's around the corner that we're gonna have driverless trucks, it always seems to be around the corner. So, we'll see when it arrives. And there's some jobs like childcare, there's no robot that can do childcare. And we need high quality childcare workers, and that means we're gonna have to pay them more. And we ought to pay them more.
So a question coming in online, I'll go back up a little bit. So the question's back on the interest rates and this, especially, where your position has been. The question is, why not move interest rates faster rather than continue the slow kind of quarter? It would be a little bit of shock to the market, but it would make the recovery speed up. Would it? Maybe it wouldn't. So basically the tear the Band-Aid approach off, right? Just hit it with 2 points or 2.5 points versus a quarter. And this is definitely out of my end of I'm in the shallow end of the pool now. So I'm dangerously going into this question, but why the policy? And maybe that's a little deep for 7:30 breakfast, but fast versus slow.
Because I'll say a few things. One is we're gonna get more information. And let's say that these supply chains do start to sort themselves out. Let's say the more workers do come back in. Maybe we're not gonna have to move as far as we otherwise would. And so there's a danger to overdoing it and ending up not needing all of that medicine, so to speak. Number one. Number two, the way monetary policy works, it's an interesting thing. It doesn't just work based on what we did last week, moving 0.25%. It actually moves based on what we signal we're gonna do in the future. So mortgage rates have moved up quite a bit. Even before we moved interest rates 25 basis points last week, we hadn't moved them at all. Mortgage rates moved up a lot over the last 6 months just because we indicated we are going to be acting. And so the path of interest rates actually matters a lot. And we have already moved the path of interest rates quite dramatically in the past 6 months. So I would just encourage people, don't just focus on that 25 basis points. Focus on what we've signaled about the path. That's what's determining what's happening. The 25 basis points is an overnight interest rate that banks charge each other. Nobody cares about an overnight interest rate. If you go get a mortgage, you care about rates over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's that path that actually matters, and there we've made a big move.
So, again, if those of you in the room, the online questions are coming in great. Thank you to the audience across the Midwest. Anyone in the room, again, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. There are some folks walking around with microphones, so please, they'll find you. So we're going to go quickly now into workforce. That's a big issue up here. North Dakota, being from here, from Devils Lake and attending UND, this has been an issue that hasn't come up just in the last couple of years. This has been a growing problem with the Bakken, and a lot of folks went west that maybe could have been staying here in Fargo or Grand Forks or maybe Jamestown. Where do you see that workforce development? And we hear it constantly, as you mentioned, the daycare shortage up here is unheard of. I had even no idea there's no third shift daycare for people who are working in longer jobs or a third shift. Where do you see that workforce development? What's the new model? Is it the 4-year degree? Is it trade school? Is it a combination? Is it a hybrid? Do we start juniors in high school on a path versus waiting until they hit that graduation deadline and then go into training? Where do you see that new, the new model that is reacting to the current state of the economy?
Well, I think because it has been an ongoing issue in North Dakota, first thing we have to do is make sure that we're actually training and reaching everybody who's here. right? We don't do that today, right? There are people who fall through the cracks of our education system and who don't get the basic skills. I'm not saying go to a four-year college. I'm saying be able to be productive contributors to our economy. So that's number one, is making sure we actually reach and train everybody who's here. Number two, this is math. I mean, look, our economy is going to grow in part by population growth. Like it's just math. If you have more people, you have more people producing things and you have more people consuming things. So if we want our economy to grow, we need people. Now, birth rates in advanced economies have been declining for decades. They've been declining in America. We're having fewer kids than prior generations. So either we accept slower growth, which is all the challenges that folks in North Dakota are aware of, or we embrace immigration. That's it. Now, I'll tell you, Japan is trying a different strategy, which is they're trying to create tax incentives and whatnot to encourage their folks to have more babies, right? That is a very challenging thing to pull off. And by the way, at a minimum, it takes about 20 years to work, just to do the math, okay? But, so if you want to wait 20 years, maybe we could try that strategy. You know, this is just math. So right now, what North Dakota did during the oil boom is you drew in workers from all around the country because you paid way up. That works if it's one hot local market. That does not work if the US economy as a whole needs workers. And right now, the US economy as a whole needs workers. So ultimately, this is a political question, which we as a country have to decide. Immigration has been a huge source of competitive strength for America over its history. It can be again, but we have to make that political decision.
Yeah, I'm interested. Is that it's vouchers for dinner? Is it vouchers for date night? It's an interesting Japan strategy. One of the things that, unfortunately, after 3 kids, we're done. So I'm out of the mix. One question online, leading back to that, you know, in the churn of the labor market, the quickly rising wages, generous hiring bonuses. Is that getting to overheated, and could it lead to a protracted period of wage stagnation once that market does renormalize? So, you know, everybody, like you said, the boom out west, you know, what happens when that, you know, does it get to a point where there's a stagnation in there?
Well, I think what we're trying to do in terms of the Fed is we are trying to engineer, people call it a soft landing, which is you have a booming economy, and what we're doing right now is we're taking our foot off the accelerator to try to let things normalize where supply and demand can come into balance into a more sustained growth rate. The question that a lot of economists ask is, well, if you look historically, sometimes when the Federal Reserve, maybe often when the Federal Reserve has tried to cool things down, you end up leading to a recession. And then you end up having an increase in unemployment and some of those jobs end up being lost. That's what we want to try to avoid. I think it's just going to be determined by, you know, how the economy unfolds, how many workers come back, what's going to happen to supply chains, do some of these inflation pressures relieve on their own, and how much of it do we have to do to try to bring supply and demand into balance? I hope we can engineer the soft landing.
No pressure, not at all. But I don't know if everybody still hear me? I may have lost a battery here.
There you go.
There we go. So one of the other areas with the challenges of workforce is workforce housing. So that segment of the population that's maybe in first or second year career part of their job, that housing isn't there at that level for them. Unfortunately, in Minneapolis market, it's exploding. That first or second home for a family is unaffordable at current rates. Time my comments out. Where do you see that workforce housing for that first or second job family that needs a space to work? Needs a space to live after getting that first or second job.
Yeah, so housing is a huge issue all around the district. This is a completely self-made problem. I would say man-made, but it's man and woman-made problem, right? If you look around North Dakota, there's a lot of land in North Dakota. A lot of places to build. A lot of places to build in Minnesota, a lot of places to build in Montana. And yet we all create barriers that make it more expensive for new supply to come in. Simply put, there is no state in the country, there is no federal government in the country that you can subsidize your way out of this problem because the need is massive. Even if the legislature comes in and says, we're going to double our investment in affordable housing, that's great. It is a grain of sand in the beach of need in North Dakota, in Minnesota, et cetera. And we're all at fault. You know, I live in a community, a western suburb in North Dakota, where we have big lot sizes because my neighbors and I like having big lots. And that makes it more expensive. If somebody wanted to build a home in our region, it makes it more expensive. Or you have minimum number of bedrooms, or car garages, or in California, mandatory solar panels. Each one of these sounds good. Each one of these is well-meaning. When you add it up and add it up, add it up, it just raises the minimum cost of a unit or of a house to unaffordable levels. So it's completely man and woman made problem. And the question is, do we have the courage to actually look ourselves in the mirror and realize we're the creator of this and we have the power to do something about it? That's it.
And for those regional centers, the challenge, right? So whether we're here in North Dakota, it's Iowa, it's, you know, Michigan, as those regional centers become more and more important, as the communities around them get a little smaller, it exasperates the problem. How do you encourage that policy then to push, you know, and I don't tell my wife I said this, but leave Maple Grove and maybe move to Alexandria, or maybe move to a smaller town that has the need, has a workforce need, but also has the housing affordability.
Well, one of the things that the pandemic has shown us is, and this, you all knew this before, but it's really become clear to almost everybody now, is how critical broadband is, affordable broadband to communities all across North Dakota, all across Minnesota. So that, because now more and more jobs are becoming remote, and now all of a sudden you could live in the small town that you want to live in. If you have access to broadband, you can live in that small town and have a good job and be able to support the local community. So for 100 years, rural communities in America have been drying up because people have been going to the cities for college, staying there for economic opportunity, and that's created huge pressures on small towns across America. It may now be that technology has changed that. I mean, maybe it's made that not necessarily a one-way street for so many small towns in America, but we need to make sure that that broadband is available, the basic infrastructure is there, and hopefully the infrastructure bill that they passed in Congress will help make that possible for communities all across. But it is a huge challenge.
A perfect segue. And if there's anybody out in the crowd again, please don't be shy. I've known very few people in Fargo to be shy, so please raise your hand, and somebody with the microphone will come over and ask a question. But you led perfectly into the next topic area, federal spending. Broadband is a great example of where I think the government actually has been doing a good job. But where do you see some of the previous spending, whether it was the help with the COVID relief, some of the infrastructure, Build Back Better, or whatever the walking zombie that used to be Build Back Better is going to fund? How do you see that federal funding? Has it worked? Are there some states that have done a better job of using those funds, as they've been given, in some cases, several billions of dollars? And then do you see a need for additional bills out of Washington? I know there's Build Back Better is going to be skinnied down to something maybe smaller, just a couple of trillion instead of $4 or $5 trillion. But where do you see that federal policy, and has it worked?
Well, I would give, our political process is imperfect, but I think it's better than, you look around the world, by comparison, it's pretty good, actually. It's imperfect and as ugly as it can seem. And I actually give Congress and both the Trump and the Biden administrations great credit for, they responded aggressively to the pandemic. Like, none of us knew how deep the hole was going to be, how many Americans were going to lose their jobs, how long those jobs would take to come back. And one of the things that we learned, I was in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis. The error that we made during the 2008 crisis is we were always a little bit late, and we're always a little bit small in our response. And so we ended up having a 10-year very slow recovery. This recovery, by comparison, has been a rocket ship. And that's in part because the Fed learned its lesson, and we were more aggressive this time. And Congress and the executive branches were very aggressive in supporting businesses and supporting families who were impacted by the pandemic. Now, history, it turns out now, I think history is going to show that they did more than they needed to do. But in the moment, you didn't know how deep the hole was. You didn't know if you were looking into the abyss. And so I said strongly at the time, it's better to err on the side of doing too much rather than too little. And I think that Congress saw that, agreed with that, and that's what they did. Not because of me. They reached that conclusion on their own. So I give them a lot of credit for that. Now, where do we go from here? I don't know. I mean, we're each going to have a spending priority that we think is important. And that's what's tough about the political process, right? I made the case earlier in this conversation. I said infrastructure and broadband internet is really important. I also made the case that, hey, childcare is actually really important for the country, and our childcare workers need to get paid more. Oh, that costs money, and that has to come from somewhere. And I bet somebody else here will have their own spending priority that they would suggest. And if you look at it, it's probably a good idea. Well, you put all of this together and we all have our ideas, it adds up to big, big, big dollars. And so ultimately it's a political process that sorts through that and tries to figure out what are we going to invest in as a country. And so, you know, I think they'll figure it out.
Well, and since we are 24 chambers around the Midwest here, are there, and you don't have to call it a favorite, not, you know, because we're in North Dakota and say they're doing a great job, but do you see a state that has kind of figured that out? Like, we're going to use this amount of money for infrastructure on roads, we've got some broadband money, and then we're dipping into housing over here. Has anybody figured out that magic formula yet? Or a piece part, maybe not the whole formula, but 2 or 3 things that have really taken off that are being successful in those local economies in a upper Midwestern state here?
Well, I'll say I can speak about Minnesota because I know it the best. I don't know what every state is doing. I serve with the deed commissioner on a task force for Governor Walz. It's a task force that's trying to advise the governor and the executive branch in Minnesota on, you know, how to spend their surplus and what to be investing in for long-term economic growth for the state. And so it's great that Steve Grove is here and will be addressing you later today. One of the things that I argued in the early part of our work was that I went back to broadband, and I said broadband is paramount for so much of our economy, for healthcare delivery, for education. A lot of money is coming from the federal government. Whatever the hole that is left, whatever gap is left, I said Minnesota ought to just finish the job. I don't know if the gap is $5 million or $500 million, but anywhere you go in Minnesota, you ought to be able to get access to high quality, high speed, affordable broadband. And I think the governor agreed with that. Again, it wasn't my idea. I'm sure that I know Steve was already there. But that's an example of let's just finish the job using the one-time money that the state has. My assumption is that other states like North Dakota also have people who are looking at this, both in the administration and advisors, who are saying, what can we best use this money for to build out our needs in North Dakota? So I'm confident that we elect people who take their job seriously and are doing their very best to make the best decisions for their voters.
Yeah, and luckily, Sean Riley from the North Dakota, he prefers IT guy, by the way. He said that I have permission to use that. Has never been more excited at a breakfast in his life. Federal money, state money coming down. One of the questions coming in from online is you mentioned the short-term rates have moved up quickly due to the forward guidance. However, the long-term rates have relatively slow. Is that concerning to you?
Well, so this is a good question. This issue, if you think about I pay a lot of attention to the 10-year Treasury yield. So when the U.S. government borrows money for 10 years, what is the yield on that bond? Part of that yield is a reflection of the expected path of interest rates, right? If we told you interest rates are going to be 5% at least for the next 10 years, you would expect the 10-year yield to be at least 5%. So part of it is what are interest rates going to be? Part of it is what is the expectation for inflation? Well, the 10-year Treasury is right now around 2.3%. It's still quite low relative to history. That is telling me a number of things. That is telling me that the interest rate environment that we're in, the interest rate that determines the neutral level of stimulus, neither stimulating or restraining the economy, is quite low relative to history. And it's telling us that inflation expectations, people's confidence about inflation in the future, is also close to where it should be. So on one hand, it's comforting because it suggests that inflation expectations are anchored. On the other hand, it's telling us, hey, the U.S. economy's long-run growth potential is still modest. And so it's telling us a lot of different things. And one thing that people pay a lot of attention to are where are short-term interest rates relative to long-term interest rates. When the yield curve, as they call it, inverts, it has been a signal that there may be a recession coming in the future. It is not inverted yet, but it is getting flatter. To me, trying to simplify everything I just said, the 10-year Treasury to me and the shape of the yield curve gives me feedback on where we are relative to neutral. So I have said that I think the neutral interest rate, federal funds rate, is around 2%. And that, the 10-year Treasury is telling me it probably still is around 2%. So anyway, it's a very technical question that was asked. There's a lot in there, but it's something I pay a lot of attention to.
Well, I think when you look at folks in the upper Midwest around the agriculture, and business development, they look at those rates because a lot of that planning, our family farm's still up by Devil's Lake. They start planning in December. They don't wait until, oh my God. So that rate increase, the current one, but then that long-term rate as they're planning and as farms are being passed down, that's a huge concern. So one other question around, and I hazard to do this because I'm sure you get asked this around, but it's a very short and to the point question. Is crypto real or just a flash in the pan, and should it be regulated? I know that's a hot topic, and I'm sure everybody in the room either has crypto or is getting crypto or what crypto to get. But as this new reset now with Russia and Ukraine and the world markets, what does that do to it, and how and what is an opinion on that if from a regulatory standpoint?
Yeah. So I've developed pretty strong views on crypto, which is I've said publicly. That it's, from what I can tell, 95% noise, hype, and confusion. And I'm reserving judgment on the last 5%, that maybe something useful could come out of the last 5%. The most basic question I always ask people who are excited about it is, what can you do with a cryptocurrency that you cannot do today? So first of all, digital currencies exist today. I can send anybody in this room $5 instantly with Venmo or PayPal or Zelle. That is a digital currency. So what could I do with Bitcoin that I can't do with that? And then I just get a bunch of fancy words, word salad, and nobody can articulate what the use case is. And then they will say, well, no, if you look at Venezuela, or if you were in Russia and you didn't want to have these sanctions imposed on you, you could get around the sanctions with Bitcoin. Okay, I get that. Why would America be in favor of that? So the use case, other than for trying to get around sanctions, or for drug lords, or for money launderers, it is not obvious to me what any normal person could do with this thing that you cannot do today using a commercial product like Venmo, PayPal, or Zelle. So, we'll see. Maybe something useful will come of it.
Well, it's great, as you can see the sponsor on the wall. Bremer Bank thanks you for that endorsement. Happy to go down to your local Bremer Bank. They'll be happy to help you open up that checking and savings account. So getting a little more local, and I apologize to some of our other friends here in the Midwest, but really because it's Western North Dakota, this is an online question that a little bit longer, but I think really fits with also where the economy is. The domestic oil and gas public companies appear to be reticent to deploy capital in the Bakken due to some of the current administration SEC policies. Doesn't seem to be holding back private companies and hedge funds. Is there anything the Federal Reserve can do to facilitate capital investment, thereby increasing domestic energy security in the current geopolitical environment?
Well, I've been asking this question. One of the things, the breakthrough, the technology revolution that has been fracking and horizontal drilling, I believed essentially put a cap on the price of oil. When oil prices would go up, the frackers would get out there, and it's much quicker to bring more production online there than in a traditional oil field. So I'm surprised that has not yet happened. And so I've been making a round of calls into the oil and gas sector, including last week. I did an event on Friday with Senator Kramer from North Dakota and the North Dakota Petroleum Council to hear directly from producers on what's going on. And it's a lot of different things that is keeping back new supply. It is a lack of confidence that prices are going to stay high. They're like, we're going to go make these investments, and then prices come back down, and then we're in trouble again with our investors. There are workforce issues, finding the workers that they need. Then there's the regulatory environment, the political environment, et cetera. And so trying to determine which, I think the most important factor is the economic one, which is, hey, we're just not sure how long these prices are going to stay high. But all of it matters. I mean, I'm basically of the camp, right now we need all the energy production we can get. And do we need to transition to a clean future? Absolutely. But one of my friends who used to be on our board, Kathy Nesit, from the oil region in Western North Dakota, she's talking about technology development of carbon capture and sequestration that's going on in North Dakota right now that is showing real promise. I hope so. I mean, I hope those things end up working, because that could be really powerful for the US economy on a number of different dimensions. And so right now, my message is we need all of the above. That doesn't mean that we don't need to have a clean future. We do. but we need a lot of breakthrough technologies on a lot of different fronts to make that happen. And I think carbon capture and sequestration I hope is going to be a piece of that.
Yeah, and kudos to the Berg administration for really leading on that on a national basis. It's not just here in the upper Midwest. We just have a couple minutes left here, so I want to get down to, and this is a giant question for as we're heading out. The debt that the federal government is incurring as we're spending, helping, aiding our way out of this. Where do you see that going in 3 minutes or less? Where do you see that going forward? And then are we on the precipice of getting a little too close to the edge, or is it right because we've never been in a pandemic like this that we have to deal with a situation like this?
I think the pandemic spending was appropriate. It's kind of like war spending. I mean, the U.S. government debt ballooned during World War II, and then it gradually came back down. So I think the key question is going to be what happens after this pandemic period is over, and what are the fiscal plans going forward. By the way, it goes back in part to demographics. I mean, for example, a lot of our social programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are paid for by current workers paying for current retirees. And as our society ages, those ratios go into the red. And so if we don't do anything on the immigration front, our budget situation is going to be a lot harder going forward. In terms of how close we are to the precipice, this is a relative game, meaning investors around the world, for all of our dysfunction and all of our challenges in America, investors around the world look at America and say, this is a better place to invest than anywhere else in the world. I mean, it's not even close. And so that's why the US government is able to borrow at very low rates. And so if Europe really got sorted out and became economically strong and competitive, or China did, investors might say, hey, I'd rather invest in Europe or in China. So, at some point that might happen. I'm still fully all in on USA for our competitive strengths. We got to keep investing, keep making smart policy choices, and I think we will be very competitive around the world. But that's really what it's going to come down to. Right now, America is still the best place in the world to invest because of our rule of law, because of our innovation culture, our education systems, et cetera. We need to keep our competitive advantage, and then we will be able to continue to borrow and fund ourselves at attractive levels.
Well, and that the investment and the next conversation, Shannon's asked, we're going to do this once a quarter. I hope you're fine coming up, and Chamber will have this scheduled once a quarter. But we really do appreciate. We could have gone for at least another hour. I have a stack of questions here, but we really appreciate you coming up, President Kashkari. Those of you who are online as well. If they would like to follow some of your research, if they would like to follow up on some of the other, you do several of these. I watched a few of your other interviews over the weekend. Where can folks look for that online? Just come to our website, minneapolisfed.org. We always record these, live stream them, put them on the website. We create a lot of research on national, global, and local issues. Just please sign up to our mailing list. We'd love to stay in touch with you, and if you see things that you think are important, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate your time, President Kashkari. Thank you for having me.
All right. What a wonderful way to start the morning off. That was a great presentation, great conversation. Thank you again, President Kashkari, for being here. A reminder, if you want to grab any refreshments during the program, go ahead, but we have a really packed program with a lot of great speakers, so we're going to keep rolling this morning, but feel free to use the restroom or grab more refreshments on the sides of the room. So my name is Catherine Grinberg. I am the Vice President of Public Policy at the Fargo-Moorhead-West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. And this morning, I have the pleasure to welcome industry leaders from across the Midwest to engage in a discussion about economic state as well as the outlook. So I would like to welcome our first panel of speakers. We have with us this morning Christy Fegan, the Vice Chair of South Dakota Utilities Commission. We have Robert Sinner, President of SB&B, and Sean Riley, the Chief Information Officer for the state of North Dakota, or Tech Guy, as Kurt announced earlier. So thank you all for being here this morning. We appreciate you joining us. So for this morning, what we'll do is we'll do quick presentations from each of them, hear some brief remarks, and then we will get to some questions. So Christy, the stage is yours.
great to be in North Dakota. Greetings from South Dakota. I love Fargo area. I actually worked for an organization for 9 years in my early career that was located in Fargo. And my husband and I's oldest son just graduated in May and works for a firm out of Fargo. And I cheer for the Bison. Your baseball team is 12-7, and I will be back to watch. So, Catherine, did you put energy first because
You could bring the energy.
Yes, I'm the Energizer Bunny. If you're the IT guy or the tech guy, I'm the Energizer Bunny. But electricity. If we don't have electricity and the lights are shut off, the economy is shut off. So in electricity regulation that I do, I work for the Public Utilities Commission for the past 10 years, we have 3 principles that we look at. Safety, reliability, and affordability of electricity. But all of a sudden, Wall Street and the policymakers have added another one, and it's carbon free. Just to look at how we've changed our resource mix of energy in the last 30 years. This is Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota. We used to be 73% of the energy we got was from coal, 0% from wind, 1% from natural gas. Now, in 2020, 35% from coal, which is a base load, just remember that. Natural gas is now 12%. That supports intermittent electricity, such as our renewables, because the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So 28% is now from wind. So that's our resource mix in our 3 states. So our 3 states belong to 2 different regional transmission organizations, and they actually operate our electric grid. And why 2? It's because Xcel Energy is in the east and is in MISO, that's 15 states. So we have members over with Otter Tail is in the east. They're in Montana Dakota Utilities. I work with the SPP regional transmission system, and that's the one that you see the red arrow. And that is 14 states from Canada down to Texas. And we have mostly basin in that area. So we have our basin membership, which is a lot of our rural electric, especially in the west. Oops. Wow, I'm missing a slide. But we'll talk about the queue a little bit in the SPP market. So this is the queue. This means this is generation that wants to come on the grid. And you see that a lot of it is wind and solar. 43% solar, 32% wind. And did you just hear all above energy in the last speaker? And we have to think about all above energy, and maybe technology isn't at the spot it is. So does anybody remember, now we live in the Dakotas and it's cold in the winter, right? Anybody remember Storm Erie where Texas had a blackout last year? Well, we had a wake-up call. We had a wake-up call in the power grid. Now, SPP did a lot better than Texas, because Texas, 4 million people out of power for an extended period of time, $200 billion worth of damage. Well, in SPP, and I am a member, and I was the chairman of the RSC last year, which is in charge of resource adequacy. Let me tell you, I stopped sleeping about February 2nd when I heard that this cold weather snap was coming. And it was below 0 from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. Our Southerners are not ready for cold weather. And the first time in our 85-year history, we had to shed a small portion of our load. We've never had to do that. Can you imagine how many media interviews I did a year ago about shutting load? So we had to shut the electricity off for an hour, just about an hour on February 15th, and a few hours on February 16th. But then I appointed a task force. It's called Improved Resource Adequacy Task Force, and we're working right now on better policy to make sure that the lights stay on and that we don't have a crisis like that. So about 4:15 in the morning in November, I get this picture that came on my cell phone because it clicked. And it was from the governor. And I was pheasant hunting. I hosted a group for her. It was an economic development group, and I don't know how they got this picture of me, but it was last fall. And when I shoot, I don't know about you, but I load, I aim, and I shoot, and I reload. And I don't always hit the target. But in the electricity market, I have to make sure that that power grid is working 24/7, 365 days. So when we talk about the future of electricity, we have to make sure the renewables have a backup energy of that fast start, which is that we don't know. It's unknown technology. Will it be battery storage? Will it be small modular nuclear? I don't know. But we live in the here and now. We don't live in the moonshot. We have to keep electricity available for you every single day. So we got a wake-up call, and we're looking at all above technology and resources.
Thank you, Christy. All right, we'll come back to questions. So if you have questions for her, go ahead and send them in using the QR code, and after this, we'll get to it. So next, let's go ahead and go to Bob for agriculture.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to start just by talking about the markets. I think we all know that the markets, the commodity prices have all increased, probably seeing the highest market prices that we've seen in 10 years. And you know, like they say in business, one person's pain is another person's gain. And that has historically certainly been true in agriculture. It seems like you have to have a disaster somewhere before farmers in this region will enjoy a little better market price. But there's a lot of things going on the supply side of the equation. Obviously, the Russia-Ukraine situation is on everybody's mind. In terms of agriculture, think about it this way. The number one wheat world exporter attacks the number 3 or 4 wheat exporter in the world. Ukraine is also a huge exporter of corn and oilseeds, sunflowers, soybeans. That in itself creates a lot of volatility in markets. Then you give them the fact that South America, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, have just been through an extensive and very severe drought. We had a big drought in the upper Midwest, southern Canada last year. And China had a big drought. So all of this is causing some massive crop disruptions worldwide. In Ukraine, the next 30, 40 days are pretty critical regarding whether or not they're going to plant a crop. Are they going to be able to get enough seed, fuel, fertilizer, chemicals? And even if they do plant a crop, what's their infrastructure look like with the ports being damaged? So globally, the world really needs a big crop. Farmers have a lot of choices, but let me tell you something. They're facing some severe situations everywhere in the United States. Input costs on everything have doubled and tripled. Now we're looking at shortages of fertilizer and chemicals. So there's a lot of risk and a lot of concern going into the planting season. Farmers are worried about high cash prices or high cash rent prices because the market's higher, but their input costs have doubled or tripled. So what's going on the demand side? States of California, Oregon, Washington, and the country of Canada have all passed and are now implementing low carbon fuel standards. driving demand for both biodiesel and renewable diesel, which comes from plants like soybeans. So what does that mean for soybean acres? We've broken records in this country the last 2 or 3 years at about 90 million acres. We need to increase that by 20% by 2024 just to meet the renewable diesel demand. In the food side, we get the food industry that certainly wants to get closer to production agriculture, throwing incentives at producers in stewardship programs, sustainability programs, but also demands from the food industry in terms of traceability, wanting to know more about how their crop was produced. The other thing that's going on in the food industry is they're beginning to source more identity preserved, certain varieties of a certain crop used for a certain specific food use. Our company has been involved in this type of a program for 30 years, working globally with food manufacturers, shipping identity preserved food quality soybeans internationally. And that brings us to supply chain issues as it relates to container shipments. I think you all recognize the strong demand in the United States for bicycles, TVs, electronics, appliances. This has really been a boon for ocean carriers. Mr. Kashkari talked about inflation. Container costs for bringing imports of these products is up 5 times, $15,000 to $20,000 a container. Not a big deal when you're putting 200 or 300 TVs in that container, but it's a big deal when you talk about exports. And the fact that our customers have concerns about cost, but more than that, it's about reliability. We have not been able to get those containers on a reliable basis. Our shipments are far behind. We just finished shipping our 2020 crop about 30 days ago in February. So this is creating significant problems for our customers. We're really going to kind of categorize as no longer a reliable supplier. They can't get their soybeans. Food manufacturers in Southeast Asia don't have the ability to carry inventories with high temperatures, high humidities. They need just-in-time shipments, and we're failing. We've even had food customers that have shut down their businesses, and we've had to air freight bags. So you go from $20 a bag on an ocean shipment to $300 to $400 a bag on an air shipment. That kills people, and they're desperate. They've had to shut their plants down. So we're working with the White House, we're working with the Congress, we're working with the Federal Maritime Commission to try and bring some resolve to this. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention technology. Agriculture certainly hasn't been left behind in technology. Precision agriculture has never been more exciting. Being able to with GPS, the pinpoint accuracy of applications is phenomenal stuff. And you think about the tractor cabs and the combine cabs. They look like the cockpit of a 747. My 6-year-old grandson could run that stuff better than I could. It's just crazy what's going on. Autonomous vehicles, they're in the pipeline. We're going to see autonomous tractors in the near future because we don't have that skilled labor force any longer in agriculture. In summary, the past 4 to 5 years, farmers have really suffered the effects of a trade war. Now they're looking at some higher prices and profitability. For global food security, I will tell you that the world's growing population needs agriculture to be more productive. We will need to constantly manage our supply-demand, realizing that conflict, weather, and policy can have an effect on our markets. I do believe the opportunities for agriculture to benefit producers looks definitely favorable in the foreseeable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And we'll end with the IT guy. Sean, we'll turn it over to you for some remarks.
Awesome. I love being the IT guy. I've got all kinds of titles, but this is the one I like. So my challenge here this morning is to make my clicker work. Okay, and I am supposed to explain the economic impact of the IT technology world to you in 5 minutes. All right, so I'm gonna need your help to do that. So I'm gonna ask everybody here, please stand up. A little exercise. Everybody, if you would, please stand up. All right. All right. If you use a computer in your job, please sit down. Anybody? All right, so if you ever wanted to know what the economic impact of technology was, I think I just showed you right there. Right? The reality is every single person everywhere is using technology in their jobs today. And this is the reality of our world. In fact, not only is it our jobs, but it's changing our industries, right? The reality is you're either a technology company today, or you better be prepared to be disrupted by one. Right? That every single industry, every organization, in fact, our lives ourselves, how many of you are wearing smartwatches? There's a lot of smartwatches in here, right? How many of you are checking your steps, checking your heart rates, et cetera, et cetera? Our lives are changing based on the technologies that are evolving today. Now, from the numbers side of things, from a pure numbers side of things, the technology industry is just shy of 11% of the GDP directly of the United States. So about 11% of the entire economic value of the country is coming from technology directly. The indirect number is substantially higher. About 12.4 million people are employed in this industry. Now that's a mix of individuals who are direct big tech companies or small tech companies, medium tech, et cetera, and all of the other industries that are out there. But the interesting part when you look at this is the growth factor. So if you look in the lower left-hand corner there, you'll see that number, 3.9 million job openings. There's 12.4 million people in the sector, and there's 3.9 million openings. Who thinks tech is growing, right? The reality is that this field is growing absolutely massively. And the interesting thing about those jobs is the breakdown of those positions is about 2/3 of those roles are working for companies that are in technology fields, right? The ones we all know, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, et cetera, those organizations. But the other 1/3 of those jobs are connected to all the other things out there in technology, connected to all the rest of our industry. Now here regionally, locally, there's about 300,000 IT jobs in the Dakotas and Minnesota alone. Has an economic impact of $38 billion annually. That's a pretty sizable environment. That's a huge portion of our overall economy. And an individual like myself who works in the field, on average, every IT person has an average salary that's about 52% higher than the median salary of all the jobs nationally, right? That means IT people, we're expensive, right? We're expensive, we're highly paid, it's a lucrative field, and there are a ton of us. So anybody want a job? All right. So there are a lot of considerations though right now. There's a lot of challenges in the world. You've heard about many of those challenges already. The Great Reshuffle, right? Everybody calls it the Great Resignation for the most part. In IT, it's been a little more Great Reshuffle. We aren't seeing as many people leave the workforce as we're seeing people move in the workforce. Lots and lots of moving around. We're seeing massive salary inflation, and not only in the salary inflation, it should just say inflation, period. The reality is that we're seeing inflation from an aspect of every single component across the board. How many of you know, say, what your hardware budget is? You know, laptops, PCs, and how many of you are dreading what that number's turning into, right? Software. We're seeing software increases as high as 17% year-over-year inflation. We're seeing hardware percent anywhere, or hardware side anywhere from 11 to 15% inflation. So the costs of the actual materials to be able to do this job is also going up substantially. Massive deployments. We have been exploding technology. There's immense amount of federal dollars out there, and we have been just exploding the technology out across everywhere. How many have been on a Zoom meeting in the last year? Teams, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, one of those things, right? And if you think back, go say 2019 and before, how often did you do that versus now? The reality is we are just massively deploying technology. It's part of the reason you're seeing these huge increases, because the demand curve didn't hockey stick, it just went straight up. It was just 90 degrees straight up on a demand curve. Supply chain is another component, and I'm sure everybody wants to talk about supply chain, but nickel, palladium, xenon, all of these different fundamental components that we need to be able to build technology have been massively impacted over the last 3 years. When you look at South Korea, when they were shut down for COVID, all of a sudden 90% of the memory, the RAM in all of our computers stopped moving. Right? So we had a massive supply chain impact. So technology sector impact is so much bigger than just the jobs themselves, and you've heard this already, but very quickly, 545 occupations in America make up 90% of the American jobs. All of them use tech, all of them, right? Everything is impacted by the technical sectors. When we look at our emerging technologies, these are all just growing and growing and growing. Autonomous robotics, right? So if you think of drones, people think of that. If you think of the little robotic vacuum cleaner that you have at home, all the autonomous robotics environments are hugely exploding. Just the unmanned aerial system environment itself could be a $2 trillion marketplace over the next 20 years. So explosive aspects in emerging tech. So overall, trying to be in 5 minutes, I didn't make quite 5, but trying to get in with 5 minutes. Overall, the industry is looking very, very good for tech, but it has a lot of challenges. It's growing quickly, it's moving fast, and it's a great place to be unless, of course, you're paying the OpEx expenses. But it's a wonderful, wonderful field, and the future's looking bright.
Thank you. Give all of our speakers a round of applause. All right, well, we're going to jump right into a panel discussion, and I think after that you can see that we could have hours of discussion with these three, but we don't have that much time, so we're going to jump right in. A reminder, go ahead and scan that QR code on your table to send in a question or raise your hand, and we have chamber staff around the room with microphones. So I'll jump in right away talking about foreign interference. Each of you kind of touched on the Russia-Ukraine situation and how that is impacting your industry. Christy, I want to start with you. Can you talk a little bit more about what this means for energy and the outlook of energy moving forward?
Good question. Russia actually supplies about 8% of our oil. And as you know, oil production has been less since COVID, so hopefully we can bring that back. But when I look at electricity, what I regulate, when I see global wars, I get nervous about cybersecurity. And that's where I get nervous when there could be an impact on our electrical grid. Because if we can shut off the electrical grid, or they can shut off the electrical grid, our economy is shut down. So Mr. IT guy over there, he's the guy that keeps me up at night. And so I had dinner with him last night and the whole group of speakers. I don't think I slept all night after our conversation.
First time she met me, she hasn't slept. It's awesome.
Okay, I think that was really bad.
But is this when I'm supposed to step in as the moderator? Is this my job?
Right. So actually, we just really have to make sure cybersecurity and our infrastructure is protected.
Absolutely. Well, then let's jump over to Sean. What do you have to say about the Russia-Ukraine situation and security?
So cybersecurity is absolutely a massive, massive, unbelievable issue in today's world. So the events that happen on a daily basis would boggle your mind. So the state of North Dakota alone defends 4.5 billion attacks per year, right? The state of North Dakota, people think of this as a small state, but from a cyber defense standpoint, we defend over 250,000 people every day. So our network is actually pretty substantial. But from an attack rate, that means we have 8,600 attacks per minute. So in the time I was just up here talking, right, we were over 45,000 attacks that hit our networks. And the reality is that with COVID and with what we've seen geopolitically, all of those numbers have just skyrocketed. Huge opportunities for the bad actors to create havoc. And this is something I would consider for all of you. I know everybody talks about cyber, but this is something, think about this in your next budgets, think about this as you go forward. It is critically important.
Yeah, and we're going to tackle that in an upcoming summit as well, talking about cybersecurity and technology. So we maybe need
August
to have you back
2nd.
then. Yes.
Come back to the chamber, all cybersecurity, right?
Yes, thank you
Awesome.
for the pitch. Great. So let's stay on this Ukraine-Russia topic, but head over to agriculture for a bit. You were talking, Bob, about the wheat exports that those countries have, as well as other commodities. How does that impact the economic outlook of the ag industry with that uncertainty?
Well, to begin with, the wheat prices started to migrate up last year when you had Western North Dakota, Southern Canada, and other parts of the world starting to have some drought issues. The minute Putin, the announcement that Putin was even considering an invasion, you started to see the market react. So since February 1st, we've not only seen wheat prices up about $1.50 a bushel, but all commodities, the three major crops are corn, wheat, and soybeans. All of these crops are higher. Yes, the Russia conflict is a big deal. It is a big deal because Ukraine has been a big supplier of commodities in the world. Russia is also a big supplier of commodities, but guess what? They're also a large supplier of fertilizer to South America. And what is going to be the ideology and what is going to be the humanitarian reaction from countries wanting to do business with Russia? So all of these things are affecting our markets, extremely volatile on a day-to-day basis, wide swings every day. So it's been pretty crazy.
Absolutely. And we have an audience question that came in asking about the fertilizer prices and how high they are and how that's going to impact commodity prices. Anything to add on that?
Only that fertilizer prices are up 2 to 3 times than they were a year ago. Fuel costs are all up, chemical costs are all up, insurance costs are all up, labor costs are up. So it's pretty much across the board. Costs, all input costs are up significantly.
Yeah. Let's jump over to talk a little bit about supply chain. That was discussed a little bit previously, and I know each industry is facing unique challenges with that. So, Sean, maybe we'll start with you. What is supply chain issues and congestion having? What impact is that having on the economic state and the outlook for the tech industry?
Yeah, so the major problem we're having right now is getting hardware devices of all sorts, everything from servers to extended laptops to radios. So you wouldn't think of radio as being all that popular today, given how many cell phones everybody has. But when you look at emergency services, you look at highway patrols, you look at police services, fire, they're still very, very dependent on radio, click-to-talk kind of radio. Those processors are hard to get today. Any kind of graphics chips are becoming rarer. And again, that pushes prices up. So we're looking at higher inflation because of the demand curve, and some of our equipment, we're looking at 18 months to be able to get some of that equipment. So it's been complicated.
So if you were to tell me on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very extreme, how crucial are supply chain issues on the industry right now?
Right now, I would say we're sitting in a 3 3/4 to 4 in certain areas. There are a couple areas that are right around the 5, but it has been a hard road for a little over 2 years on this space, and we're not sure when it's going to get better.
Absolutely. Christy, let's talk about energy a little bit. Same kind of question, and then we'll ask you the scale at the end.
So as you know, we have infrastructure that we built. And actually, for a workforce, our workforce on our utilities that operate is stable. They don't get as many applications, but they're getting applications. But the contract workers, we can't get contractor workers to build the infrastructure, and then there's supply issues, and there's delays. So it's all encompassing with workforce and supply issues.
So if you were to put it on the scale of 1 to 5, 5 extreme, where are you at?
We are about that 4.
Okay. And Bob, what do you have to say about supply chain issues?
Oh boy, I could talk about this all day. For our business specifically, not only the costs of getting a product to a customer, but the timeliness and the reliability. So the containers come into our country, we rely on those containers to ship our product out. Unfortunately, the ocean carriers don't want our product. They want to get the containers back empty overseas as quickly as possible. so they can fill it full of a high revenue container to bring it back. We've been fighting this for 17 months. So we're typically done exporting all of our goods by September of the following year, right? So we harvest in October, we start shipping, and by September we're done. We just finished a month ago with our 2020 crop because we just can't get the supply of containers. The congestion, the reliability, it's been a horrible, horrible time. And our customers are frustrated. They're looking for other sources. This is a global issue for everyone. And we tear our hair out. I mean, this has been horrible. We got logistics staff that are on phone all day long. They get emotional. It's been a really painful situation for not only our company, but more so for the food companies internationally that rely on us.
So you're not off the hook. 1 to 5, where are you at?
We're on a 5. This has been horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. High numbers all around. Well, I want to get to workforce questions, definitely, because that is obviously something that a lot of businesses are feeling. But I know we have a lot of industry experts in the room here as well, so I want to make sure and give an opportunity to raise of hands anyone that has a question for any of our industry experts. All right, if you do, raise your hand and we'll have a chamber staff member come around to you. But we'll talk workforce in the meantime. We have about 5 minutes remaining here with our speakers. Let's start with you again, Sean, talking about technology. You talked about the growth in the industry. And how is that matching for workforce? And like you said, the great resignation versus more moving around in the industry. What does that have as an impact on the economy?
So let me give you a kind of a scary data point. All of the universities in all of South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota combined are not putting out enough computer science and computer-related graduates to meet the demand of just our 3 states, right? Every single college combined in those 3 states is not giving us enough graduates to meet today's needs of posting in just our 3 states. And not everyone stays here, right? And we, of course, have to try to poach from other areas and bring them here. Well, both the coasts know that the Midwest is a wonderful place to poach too. So we're in a talent war. I mean, it's just point blank, it's a talent war. And we are seeing staff who are getting cold called, who have never been asking for a new job. They're happy with what they're doing. They get cold called, and the company calls them and says, what do you make? Well, I make $84,000. How would you like to make $168,000? Just boom, done, right? We receive those in our teams on a constant basis. That's the technology problem that we have right now, because that is how short the workforce is.
So I'm going to assume if I asked a scale, it'd be at a 5.
We're absolutely 5. And the cybersecurity side is a 6. I mean, the cybersecurity side, there's more than 600,000 open jobs in that space, and we are not even close in that workspace.
Well, I know Commissioner Lamont and Commissioner Grove are in the backstage wing, waiting to come on stage after this panel, so they will definitely be discussing the workforce war that you were just talking about. Bob, let's talk about agriculture and where that sits for workforce and the concerns that you're seeing there.
It's tough. It really is tough. Skilled labor, number one, is difficult to find. High-paying jobs are, there's a lot of people leaving the farms. So labor's tough. In our own business, we've been fortunate, I think, to keep a pretty reliable staff. We train them. They're skilled. They do a lot of things in our processing facilities that are important to us. We got to pay them well. We got to compete. And I think everybody in the room knows that our unemployment levels are extremely low, and everybody's looking for more help. So it's a concern.
Christy, talking about energy.
Just quickly, our son graduated with an electrical engineering degree in power. And so when he graduated last May, he had his offer nearly a year in advance. And so there is so much competition for engineers and et cetera. And you guys are all competing. And he gets to work from home now because of COVID. So now you're competing with the entire US to supply electrical engineers in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. But the big thing is our skilled workers and our contract laborers, our welders, our boilers, our maintenance people, the people that are utilities contract work, that's the tough job. And so that would be a 5. Our operations of our utilities is more probably a 2.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we set the stage well for the next panel talking about the workforce solutions. I would have loved to get into your solutions, but we'll just leave it at the problems for now with workforce and let the next panel take that. But before we head off the stage, one last question that I want to run through with each of you, and I know we're out of time, so we'll keep this really brief, okay? But the last question is, one word that describes the economic outlook of your industry. One word. So I won't even give you choices. I'll let you just take that from there. Bob, you want to go first?
Challenge.
Sean?
Entertaining.
That's what you want to hear. Christy?
We've had a wake-up call.
All right. Well, let's give it up to our speakers one last time. We'll now be joined on stage by Shannon Full, our President and CEO of the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber, for the next panel. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell.
You're welcome.
Hello.
In hockey territory, we know the more sticks you have on the ice, the stronger your power play becomes. That's why our power comes from a diverse energy mix, each resource ready to cover the next when winters get too cold, too dark, and too still. It's only possible with a team-based strategy, the renewable energy of wind and water, and the steadfast backbone of lignite coal. Yeah, we start every season with a deep bench because we're all in on all of the above energy.
All right, good morning, everyone. All right, it's about this time, I'll even stand up. It's about this time of the morning that you're getting a little bit squirrely, right? So just remember to please go ahead, and the refreshments are on both sides of the room for those of you in person. Again, welcome to all of those online. So excited to have the 24 co-hosting chambers with us. So it's my great pleasure, for those I haven't met, Shannon Full, the president of the chamber here, my great pleasure to be joined by our 2 commerce commissioners, Commissioner Steve Grove from Minnesota, Commissioner James Lamont from North Dakota. I get the opportunity to have a dialogue with them in just a minute, but we're going to open it up by having Commissioner Grove give a few comments about Minnesota and the commerce and the economy there, and then Commissioner Lamont will follow him. So, Commissioner Grove.
All right. Thanks, Shannon. Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's great to be here in North Dakota. We Minnesotans are happy to cross the border. Someone yesterday described to me the river is a seam, not a border, which I kind of liked. We can all spend this morning lifting up our region, and we may be in competition sometimes, but I think most of all, we're collaborating together at a really, really unique moment in our economy. Thrilled to be here today. It was great to hear President Kashkari earlier today, and honored to be here with Commissioner Lehman this morning, and looking forward to this conversation. And thanks to Mayor Mahoney and Mayor Carlson for hosting us here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. What a great opportunity today to lift up an extraordinary region in our country at a really critical time. I think the Midwest can not only be a part of the conversation about where our economy is headed, but really lead in this next chapter and help write where the future of the global economy is headed. I had the opportunity yesterday to spend some time in Moorhead with lots of business and community leaders, and you could just feel the exuberance for growth in this region. And when you look at the numbers, it tells a really compelling story. We've seen 17% population growth in this region, historically low unemployment rates. I learned yesterday that building permits have gone from about 40 a year to almost 200 a year just in the last year here in the region. And of course, you've got a great startup ecosystem here with I think, $4 billion companies in recent years, and a great energy sector as well. And if you don't think Midwest is a place for innovation, look no further than the Red River, where you all are figuring out how to divert 30 miles of that river to create opportunity for 235,000 citizens of this region, and so much more economic development as well. So it's just an exciting place to be at a really unique time. And I thought just before we head into the conversation, I'll share a couple of thoughts about where Minnesota's at, and really why we're bullish about the Midwest, bullish about our state at this unique time, but also some of the challenges that we face that COVID-19 has really accelerated, and what we're doing about them here in Minnesota. First of all, a little bit of background about me. I grew up in Minnesota, but spent the last 20 years in Silicon Valley working for Google. This is the first time that I've been in a public sector position, and so I'm learning a lot about how government works and what it can do, but also how to promote this state that I grew up in, but then left and have now come back to with my wife and our 5-year-old twins. And I have to say, coming back to Minnesota and getting to kind of reintroduce myself to the state and learn it with kind of a fresh pair of eyes has been really exciting. We have one of the most diverse economies in our country. The 7th most diverse economy of the 384 metros in the country is the Twin Cities. Number 1 per capita for Fortune 500s in the Twin Cities as well. That's a huge strength, especially during times of economic challenge, because that diverse economy can hold up to a lot of different components. Amazing infrastructure in our state of Minnesota. We've got over 90% of the state attached to broadband and more to come. We have an airport that has 137 destinations that run through it, and one of the best commercial ports in the country, along with 3 foreign trade zones. There's some great infrastructure in Minnesota as well. And we've got a great and dynamic innovation ecosystem. And again, I come from Silicon Valley, which is, of course, nationally and internationally known as this hotbed of innovation. But I tell you, Midwest has it going on, and not just in the Twin Cities, but also here in Fargo and Moorhead. We see a lot of activity here. A lot of folks are doing what my wife and I did, and leaving the Valley, leaving New York to come to places that are more livable, more affordable, have access to capital that has been untapped. And we're seeing that happen in our region quite a bit, and a ton of medical technology acceleration, in particular in Minnesota, which we're just really excited about. But I think, the real secret of our state and our region is our talent. And when you look at the education ecosystem in Minnesota, the post-secondary institutions, the fact that we're 3rd in the nation, the percentage of people that graduate from high school, and 5th of those who graduate from college, and then we have some of the highest labor force participation rates in the country. That idea of a hardworking sort of Midwestern work ethic isn't just sort of an idea, some kind of bucolic vision of the Midwest. It's actually true. The numbers bear it out. People here work hard, and they work hard, and they believe in the companies they start. In Minnesota, we have the best business survivability rate in the nation. If you start a business in Minnesota, more likely to be around 5 years from now than in any other state in the country. That's something that we're proud of, and that we think, especially now when business starts to increase, we really need to lean into. So we are bullish on our state, we're bullish on this region, and we really think that the Midwest has an opportunity at this unique moment in our global economy to define ourselves as really the global center for health and wellness in the country. This is a state in Minnesota that has fed the world, has clothed the world, has taken care of the world through medicine, and of course, being here in ag country has helped feed the world. And that's something that we really take seriously. We've got in Minnesota the top health technology cluster in the country, the #1 hospital. Medical Alley, of course, is sort of the Silicon Valley for med tech, and we're very proud of that in Minnesota, and the startups that it creates, and the innovation and solutions that it really brings to some of the most pressing medical challenges we face. And during COVID-19, we all saw how important innovation is in the technology and health sector, and I think Minnesota is well positioned to take advantage of that at this really unique juncture in our economy. But with all those advantages, and again, I am exuberant as you are about this region, there's been a lot of challenges that I think COVID-19 has accelerated and that we have to pay attention to. And I think in Minnesota, there's 3 that I'd just point out real quickly, and I'll tell you about a few things we're doing about them that I think are important for us to keep top of mind at this moment in our story. The first is, of course, that COVID-19 has truly accelerated the disparities that we see in our economy between whites and people of color. And that is a fact. Every number bears that out. In Minnesota, 30% of American Indians and 27% of blacks are living below the poverty line. Only 7% of whites are doing so. When it comes to homeownership, 76% of whites in our state owns homes, but only 25% of homeowners are black. A huge disparity in homeownership, which is the primary way you transfer wealth between generations, right? This is a huge disparity. And the pandemic led over 2/3 of black Minnesotans to apply for unemployment insurance, a program that my department leads in Minnesota, compared to just 35% of whites. So the effects of this pandemic have really changed the contours of the conversation around race. And then, of course, you have the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed. This is an inflection point for us in Minnesota, and we know it. The primary international attention that has been focused on our state over the last 2 years has been through the lens of that civil unrest, that murder, that trial. And we have some work to do. And not just from the perspective of doing what's right by our people and our citizens, but by our economy. Because 70% of the population growth in Minnesota over the next 10 years is coming from people of color. That is where our labor force is growing. And if we can't right some of these inequalities, we're not going to make the kind of progress we need to as an economy. So at our department, we are driving records amount of money towards targeted populations, whether it's through federal grant programs or state. We've seen a 60% increase in Small Business Development Center consultations with founders who are Black and brown in our state, a record amount of money going to technical assistance for new business starts, and a lot more innovation dollars too into some of these startups and organizations that are led by founders of color. This is something that we as a region have to get right. I talked to leaders here yesterday who are thinking the same way. And we've also got to increase our outreach and engagement at a time when, folks are looking for opportunity and money in government and don't always know how to navigate those systems. One of the things that we've built at our department recently is an Office of New Americans, and it focuses on how to help new Americans in our state navigate, government programs, opportunities to grow their businesses. This is critical for growth here. And one of the things we're trying to do at our agency too is make this everyone's job. Equity isn't just something you can kind of hire one person in a team to go do over there and they'll figure it out. Organizations that are making progress in this space are making it everyone's job. And one of the things that I brought from Google to our agency is a goal setting process called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. Set a big goal, have some numbers that measure whether you've been successful or not. We've asked every team at our agency to have a goal focused on equity with measurable outcomes we can measure to make sure we're making progress. Again, this is an economic imperative as much as it is a moral one, and something that we as a state know we need to get right at this unique juncture. The second trend line we've seen that the pandemic has brought is an unprecedented jump in new business starts. We've seen 40% increase in new business starts in Minnesota over the last year. That's huge. And importantly for a state that has traditionally been good in that business survivability, which I talked about a moment ago, but has been on the lower side in terms of new business starts, this is a time of innovation. The disruption has really caused a lot of people to start new things. We're investing a lot in making sure we meet this moment for new companies. So we've got items in our budget this year in the legislature with a $10 billion surplus to focus on jobs for young people, tech jobs in particular, reskilling folks into new industries, as President Kashkari spoke about a moment ago, to ensure that if you're trying to switch a job into a job that maybe is more tech-centric, you can get that training. And then we need some ecosystem supports that will help startups and innovators and venture capitalists collaborate together and put our ecosystem on the map. Launch Minnesota is a program we launched under Governor Walz to do that. Very focused on some early stage innovation grants that can help new businesses get inspired to get started. And we brought back the Angel Tax Credit. This is a no-brainer tax policy that gives venture capital investors a reason to look at Minnesota, a reason to look at our region, because they'll get a little bit of a tax credit for doing so. And that tax credit is something we'd like to make always on in our state. It has had tenfold the benefit when you put that into play. So a lot of new business growth. We've got to focus on that and how to make sure we really capitalize on it. And then lastly, I'd just say this is an unprecedented moment of worker power. You all see this as chamber leaders, as leaders in our economy. Those wages have increased by about 8 to 10% across most industries, more in some industries. And that is a good thing. That helps put money in the pockets of people who for a long time have had suppressed wages. But it also means we need to ensure that businesses and workers can make the right matches to ensure that we are really growing our economy and increasing productivity. And one of the things that we're very focused on is helping businesses access pools of labor they might not have usually paid attention to, looking in new places, whether that's folks who are recently leaving incarceration, whether it's people of color in communities that companies need connections into, whether it's people with disabilities who are a huge opportunity for our economy, and also starting younger in the career journey. I had the opportunity just yesterday to be at the Moorhead Career Academy. What a fantastic institution that Moorhead has built for its young people to get access to that career opportunity really early, to get a sense for where they can head. And that doesn't mean just going to college, right? It means jobs in construction or in the trades or in manufacturing. That kind of early stage thinking for young people. We, for far too long in our national economy, have said we're going to deplete the number of industrial arts classes in high school because all those jobs are going to China. That has not been the case, and we need to reverse that quickly. I think Moorhead has shown it is. The community is a real leader there in starting earlier. And then we've got to focus on workforce-related issues, childcare, housing, transportation. I'm sure we'll get to that in some of our conversation. But we also have to make sure we invest in automation. I know that's something my friend across the border here is focused on a lot in North Dakota. The idea that the robots are coming to steal our jobs, I think, is long since past. We're saying, robots, come, take our jobs. We don't have enough people for them. In Minnesota, we have 2.7 people searching for every one job, 2.7 jobs for every one person searching for them. So we've got to automate more quickly. Government should incentivize that through loan programs, through tax incentives. We've got to have a more forward-leaning orientation there. And then lastly, I would just say, we have to attract talent to the region. The Midwest for a long time has bled talent. It's just a reality. We last year in Minnesota lost 10,000 citizens. Just this morning we saw census data for the Twin Cities. Both Hennepin and Ramsey County actually lost people last year. That is not the trend line that we want to see. We want to see the reverse. We want to welcome new people into our state. And I'll just say from Minnesota's perspective, for a long time, we haven't invested in marketing or promotion of Minnesota. We've kind of, I wouldn't say rested on our laurels, but we've just allowed people to kind of discover us as they will and then come in and grow our economy. We feel very differently about the market today. It is intensely competitive out there. We've got to be assertive. I was on the treadmill this morning here listening to a podcast, and it was a national podcast, I think it was NPR. And after the podcast, I heard an ad for Jobs Ohio. Jobs Ohio. Come to Ohio and live in Ohio. We've got a great place to live, great jobs, great opportunity. Well, that should be North Dakota. That should be Minnesota. We need to be in those conversations. We've got to pay money to do it. So we have launched a new website at joinsmn.com. It kind of tells the story of why Minnesota, but we have to invest in actually telling that story outside of our region. So we're exuberant for this moment, excited for the conversation this morning, thrilled to be with you all, and just want to end by thanking you all for the work you do to build our economy. This is a really unique moment for our country and our states, and we're going to get it right if we work together. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Grove. Commissioner LeJeune.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. I mean, this is energizing. You've got, from what I understand, about 650 of you in this room, which I think is telling. It's telling of the situation in the Fargo-Moorhead area. It's telling for the Minnesota economy, the North Dakota economy, and it's really awesome to see everybody here today. I'm James LeJeune. I was appointed Commerce Commissioner 13 months ago. It's been an amazing 13 months. I can't begin to even, go through all of the projects and all of the growth opportunities that we've observed, but I am going to give you sort of a high-level synopsis on where we are. As a state, we are growing, and we're growing fast. We have the fastest growing county in the nation. We have the fastest growing city in the nation, the second, third, and the fifth fastest cities growing in the nation, as well as if you look at the last two decennials or census counts, we're now number 4. Before that, we were number 1. So we're on track, I think, as a state, given the growth opportunities in this community, as well as sort of the other regions throughout the state. I think we're going to continue to see that trend. So what I wanted to talk about today were some of the greatest opportunities here in the state of North Dakota. 13 months ago, when I was the Economic Development and Finance Director for the state, we had, actually I'll go back even further. When I took over the Economic Development and Finance portfolio about 3.5 years ago, we had about $800 million worth of CapEx planned for our state. For perspective, the state's economy is worth approximately $60 billion. I'm going to go with the year prior to the coronavirus, naturally, because that one just doesn't count. Plus the data hasn't come out yet anyway. So we were doing about a 60-to-1 ratio, which I thought was just abysmally, just horribly low. And so what we did was we took our team and strategically analyzed which industries had the highest propensities for growth, which projects we should be looking at, and most important, where our people should be on planes in boardrooms articulating this state's value proposition. So as I stand before you today, we have $36.5 billion either my boss has announced, private industry has announced, we're getting ready to announce, and that doesn't include probably the next 20 behind that. If you read the Fargo Forum, the Bismarck Tribune, any of the Western papers, you will see that we've been very fortunate, probably just especially the last 8 months or so, to announce a multi-billion-dollar project every 3 weeks or so on average. What's unique about that is when you look at the total CapEx, wow, this clock goes fast. When you look at the total CapEx now as a percentage of our state GDP, it's the highest in the country. It's literally 60% of our entire GDP right now that we have in projects. And the unique part of that is, and it's not just oil and gas and agriculture anymore. It's the nexus points, between those industries. It's the manufacturing clusters that we're growing. And what's really unique is we're seeing this happen in every region of our state, even areas that we considered rain shadows, if you will, for economic development. For example, some of the reservations. Having a big RV manufacturer locate near Turtle Mountain is really special because that helps that area grow. Or if you look at the far southwestern part of the state, same scenario, right? Your Hettinger and Bowman area. Now we've got growth opportunities there as well that go beyond just energy and agriculture. And then equally as important, we are the second largest hydrocarbon producer in the country, yet we will be the first carbon neutral state by 2030. And at first, about a year ago, when my boss announced that at the Williston Basin Conference in Bismarck, you could have heard a pin drop. Like when he said, I don't know if any of you guys were there, but it was like thud. But it was because we didn't articulate that proposition very well. What he was saying was this: we have an opportunity to lead clean energy growth and development, leveraging our existing assets, growing those assets, all of the above, whether it's coal, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's, you name the oil sector within the energy industry, or rather the energy sector within the industry, and we are growing each and every one of those pieces. And then at the same time, we have found that the energy, or rather the ag to energy nexus is just as strong. So several soy crushing facilities, we're working several corn to jet fuel facilities. We're working naturally the largest GTL, net zero GTL project in North America, and the largest hydrogen project in North America as well. And then simultaneously, just north of here in Grand Forks, you'll see that the largest biorefinery in the country is located there, and it's growing. It's got a $500 million expansion plan. You also see that in Dickinson with another biorefinery run by Marathon Energy. Why is that important to the Fargo-Moorhead area? Well, it's important because 55% of our state budget derives from oil and gas. And if gas is increasing as a proportion of oil, well, we got to find a home for that gas. And that's why we've been working so hard to find a home for that gas in clean hydrogen and gas to liquids and other projects associated with that, so that we can continue funding infrastructural projects here, but also the tech and other innovative programs that this region has come to enjoy very well. Simultaneous to that, much like Minnesota, we haven't really invested in global branding, over the last several years. We're getting ready to do that because we're no longer just sort of North Dakota, find us on a map, or the movie Fargo. It's a place where we have the fourth largest or fourth highest GDP per capita, and simultaneous to that growth to being carbon neutral, we will have the highest GDP per capita by 2030 in the United States. Ironically, even though there's a lot of wealth here in the Fargo-Moorhead area, it's among the lower GDP to per capita regions in the state. It's actually about 10,000 higher per household in Bismarck, and as you move further west, as you can imagine, it gets even higher than that. So southeastern part of the state, we have a lot of work to do together to get that higher. Simultaneous to that, several speakers have mentioned the autonomous investments we're making. Recently, we announced the $10 million at Grand Farm. The idea is this: we're going to take Grand Sky, which is spatial and aerial integration for unmanned systems. We're going to take the farming community here on the terrestrial or land-based, and then we're going to work with Sean Riley, who was up here earlier, and his team to build the most robust ecosystem in the United States as far as integration of aerial, spatial, and terrestrial-based autonomy is concerned. Commissioner Grove talked about the 2.5 to 1. Well, we have 1,000 people when you adjust for seasonal employment on unemployment in the state. That means only 1,000 people are looking for jobs that aren't impacted by seasonal adjustments, yet we have over 30,000 open jobs. That's a 30 to 1 ratio. So we're gonna be working very hard on automation as well as supplying some highly unique workforce solutions that we believe we can deploy here in rapid fire. So yesterday, my boss announced the first of many grant announcements that we've made. It's a drop in the bucket, I get it. It's $50 million. We want to pilot a few things to figure out when we go back to the legislature here in about 9 months, what works and what doesn't, so that we can ask for a bigger basket, if you will, of workforce tools and solutions. We have the jobs, we have the community quality of life indices and all of the things that make it kind of special, but what we don't have really is that branding piece, which we're working on extensively, as well as how could we incent various workforce activities to occur over the next several years so that we can mitigate that 30,000, because as you know, here in Fargo-Moorhead, you got another 7,000 coming from the diversion, your medical community especially. Our medical community, I live 3 miles down the road, even though my office is in Bismarck. Our medical community is obviously at a competitive disadvantage because of its workforce challenges. But then simultaneous to that, I talk about $36.5 billion of growth. Well, we're gonna have to find those construction workers from somewhere over the next several years, because the permits in this state usually take about 9 months, which is also the fastest in the United States because of our Class 6 well primacy and other things that the federal government has delegated to us. So a lot of really unique opportunities on the horizon. One thing we're also looking at is how do we continue to have some of the smartest, we are the most wired state in the country. We want to leverage that so that we can increase workforce options for many of you so that you can leverage skills and assets from North Dakotans across the state, or even Minnesota, even having lived there before I moved to North Dakota. I mean, this region as a whole just has really sophisticated broadband, including in small communities that wouldn't traditionally have it if you were outside the upper Midwest. Another piece you're going to be looking at here over the next several months is we're going to be piloting new Main Street programming efforts. And the reason why is if you want to attract workforce, if you want to attract, economic diversification, you have to have communities where people want to live and grow. And some communities have done an amazing job at that, especially this community, super adept at what we've done downtown, obviously all of the amenities and everything that comes with that. If you look to Grand Forks, they're not far behind. In fact, they have probably the coolest steakhouse in the state. I don't know if any of you guys have eaten there, but they also have, several $100 million of planned and private sector led downtown renovation, which is really, really special. And so we want to start seeing that, Williston and Watford City have done an effective job. That's why they continue to grow, because they have the jobs, they have the amenities that they've invested in as a community, et cetera. And so smartest communities, smartest workforce, that's what you're going to be seeing coming out of Commerce. What we want to do is this. The federal government has been firing, a multi-trillion-dollar bazooka into the economy like every quarter. And so we want to leverage that really well, and we want to leverage it from a systems level integration perspective so that we make the right investments at the right time, and we're able to funnel the right amount of money into companies that require that growth. So what I see for success over the next several years, as I've told my boss when I took this job, is first and foremost, and Marshall Albright's here, I had a conversation with him 2 weeks ago, and what does success look like? And for me, as Commerce Commissioner for this state, we want to be able to have an offtake agreement for every carbon molecule so that we can exceed that 2030 goal. In fact, you're already seeing carbon negative energy being produced in the Bakken, far southwest with Danbury. No more soy, no more wheat. And what I mean by that is every single one of these, corn, et cetera, has a long-term offtake agreement because the state will have built that foundation for the next generation's growth. The key, though, is to achieve the carbon neutrality goal, to achieve the highest GDP per capita. We feel like we're about halfway in terms of that CapEx requirement, so we're going to continue to be super aggressive, super growth-oriented, and we're going to ensure that we have the workforce programming and community-based programming to support those initiatives so that you, as private industry, have the requisite tools available to you for that workforce growth, integration, as well as long-term sustainability. So with that, I think I'm going to give you 3 minutes back and look forward to participating in the panel. Thank you.
Great, so we're going to jump right into some questions. As a reminder, remember all those QR codes are on your tables. Please send in your questions. We really do want this to be as interactive as possible. And those of you watching online, send us your questions. We'd love to answer those. But let's kick it off with the topic of what seems like the year is workforce. And so you talked a little bit in your comments, both of you, around workforce strategies and what your states are focusing on. As we look at the individual regions throughout your states, what are some of the your thoughts around workforce strategies and partnership with your communities as it relates to recruiting, retaining, and developing talent? Anyone want to start, Commissioner Grove?
Sure. Well, I think that there's not one solution to the workforce challenges we face. There's about 50. We have to focus on a lot of different directions. I would say, broadly speaking, we've got to first of all take seriously these workforce adjacent issues like childcare, transportation, and housing. We've heard a lot of those themes yet today. We're putting a record amount of money through our department to help new childcare businesses get started. But let's face it, it's a broken market. The childcare market does not work. It is economically unviable. The price points don't net out for the wages you have to pay, and you can get a better job elsewhere. So we're looking at how you can potentially use tax incentives there, how you can help subsidize some of those wages, raising some of the C-cap rates in Minnesota to make it more affordable for people. So you got to look at these sort of adjacent issues to make workforce work better. But I'll say there are a lot of workers hiding in plain sight. And I think a lot of businesses are not, are waking up to the fact that they have to look in areas they haven't looked before for workers. Whether that's looking at younger workers in that pipeline in high school, whether that's looking in communities where they don't have as many connections, or whether it's looking for people with disabilities. There's a lot of workers available that we aren't accessing for businesses. Our department's goal is to help build bridges into those communities from the perspective of businesses. Not every business has a large HR team that can do all the recruiting that maybe a Best Buy or a Target can do, and so we try to fill that gap there. And we have to attract more workers to our state. There's no question to that. We have to entice more people to come, and we've got to automate to help ensure that the productivity can increase, even though the workforce challenges are going to be tough. I'll say this, even before COVID started, our economists at our department were predicting about a 2% drop in labor force participation in our state in the coming 5 years. So in a lot of ways, this isn't some problem that is a COVID-only problem. I was hearing a lot about this before the first case of COVID hit Minnesota. And the demography and the demographic realities that we face are going to make this a challenge for the next 10 years unless we start to try different things to get different results.
Great. Commissioner Lamont.
Yeah. So we have a unique challenge in the state in that we have the highest labor participation rate in the country already. So of the 780,000 North Dakotans that call the state home, 400,000 of them are already in the workforce. As I mentioned earlier, we've got about 1,000 or so that are currently seeking employment. So we don't really have much of a margin to draw from in that regard. So as a result, first thing we need to do is understand from a systems level, which is what we're doing, the child care issue. Historically we've sold it as an education issue. I think we need to pivot from that and sell it as a workforce issue so that we can encourage people so we don't have to continue looking that are bogged down by disproportionately high child care costs as a percentage of what they would earn in the workplace. But simultaneously, longitudinally speaking, setting ourselves up for the long-term success of that workforce. Simultaneous to that, working with higher ed, working with CTE, working with K through 12, we know we can only solve about 40% of the challenge. So in-migration is going to have to become something that we focus on if we're going to solve this challenge. We can't automate our way into this role. It's nice to be able to automate some jobs and turn into, now you've got two $85,000 a year technicians versus four, folks that are working the line or whatever the case is. So automation is part of the strategy. Early childhood education is part of the strategy, so we can dig further from, workforce. We work very closely with New Americans, which are highly concentrated here in the Fargo-Moorhead area, for example, and try to educate them on opportunities. A lot of them are small business owners, so they already have sort of, their own sort of network, but we're trying to draw from that. But long-term speaking, I think the state's going to have to, just like Minnesota, we have a significant surplus. We're going to have to make major investments in what these pilots reveal, in my opinion. Whether it's from a community perspective, because you're going to have to recruit people to live in these places beyond Fargo-Moorhead to be successful across the state. And you're going to have to invest in programs that we can demonstrate work, which is what the legislature is going to be looking to make those investments. So it's going to be a full-scale effort with full-scale integration of federal programming, private sector-led initiatives, because that's the thing. Like yesterday's announcement by Governor Burgum, that grant money is a 1-to-1 or 4-to-1 private match, meaning industry comes up with $1 and we come up with $4. But the key is we want industry to tell us what they think could work best, because each of our regions have very unique needs. Minnesota too. I mean, they're just not one and the same. And so as a result, I think we're going to be taking that package, if you will, to the legislature to help them understand what investments would likely be most effective and which ones we should probably look to do later.
Great. Yeah, I will agree. That's been a big area of conversation for us, is the regionalizing of these, whether they're marketing dollars for recruitment or whether they're retention and development, regionalizing those because our regions are so vastly diverse, right? So if we stay on that area of talent attraction and in-migration, What role do each of you play and your teams play as it relates to international talent recruitment? You know, we're hearing a lot of companies. I'll give an example here in our local community. Sanford Healthcare is looking at and is already bringing in hundreds of international nurses to fill the demand. What role does the state have in that, and what do you expect and want to see out of the private sector? Commissioner Lamont, you want to start?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the private sector has to become much more vocal with their legislators, right, to help really understand the severe deficit we're in. That said, Commerce as an agency is actually engaged in 2 major contracts recently, from a branding perspective, but also from a curated sort of, it isn't quite individual like an agency would do, but like a company could come to us and say, I need 15 highly skilled workers in X, Y, or Z. And so we now have a curated contract mechanism to help them find those workers. Simultaneously, and we're going to be rolling these grants out. Yesterday was the first announcement from the governor. He's got a couple more coming. But in November, as part of our Accelerate ND initiative to the legislature, other programs were funded. So companies can expect additional sort of one-to-one grant matches, if you will, if you're looking for visas. You know, if you're in North Dakota, we could leverage the TN visa very effectively. Why? Because there are 70 occupations, and we can go to Canada and Mexico. It's a 2-week process. Name anything the federal government does that takes 2 weeks. But it's a 2-week visa process, literally, once you hire somebody that falls within one of those 70 criteria. And oil and gas, ag, sophisticated automated technician jobs, these are all on the list, and we should be looking at that. Same thing with J visas. We work very closely with primarily the medical community on that. I mean, so it's a comprehensive understanding of how federal immigration policy works, but then also how we can educate industry on not only the tools available to them, but also here's what these particular programs or immigration programs, if you will, mean to you. And that's something that I think gets lost sometimes, because there are some programs right now that we could we can leverage today to help you solve some of those workforce challenges. So come to us, we'd be happy to work with you on that. And then, like I said, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be rolling out a couple more grants specifically for that issue, so that you can have a one-to-one match for in-migration.
Great. Commissioner Groh.
Well, this is such an important issue. I mean, our country's been built off of immigration. Minnesota's population has only increased over the last 15 years because of international immigration. That's been the secret to our success. We've long been a very welcoming state for international immigrants. Right now, we have about 1,200 Afghan refugees in Minneapolis and St. Paul getting ramped up there, and our department's training them for jobs in our economy. And you look at the crisis in Ukraine right now, 3 million people have left the country. And of course, depending on how things go, they may end up finding their way to other places. We should be welcoming them here in the Midwest to come and work, especially given so many of them have experiences in industries that are so central here. One of the things we're trying to do here is make sure that when someone comes to our state from out of the country, that we level them into a job that they are qualified to do, rather than having PhDs or doctors driving Ubers around Minneapolis, St. Paul. That is a huge waste of talent. And there are some challenges in shifting licensures and things over to a new state. So we have a new program, we're in the middle of it right now, focused on internationally trained healthcare workers in particular, to just really speed up how fast they can integrate into our healthcare economy, because that's such an important component of this. On your larger question on sort of marketing and how we promote our state, we've got to spend money to get results. And again, I come from the private sector where, big companies like Google have billion-dollar marketing budgets. That was kind of what I was used to. And when I walked into our department at DEED, I said, hey guys, where's the marketing budget? And everybody just kind of chuckled. We don't really have a marketing budget. And I kind of floored me. I was like, how could we have a Department of Economic Development and not have marketing money? Again, it just hasn't been part of the culture of our state. And we're trying to change that. I think we need to spend some money to share our message. We can do so in the way that feels uniquely Minnesotan and Midwestern. But we have to do it. We have to be in those conversations, because it's a lot more competitive and challenging. So immigration is a federal policy issue, obviously, but states can do some unique things if we really lean forward, and we've got to, because it has to be part of the equation to meet the workforce shortages.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the 3 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, have all been extremely humble as it relates to telling our story. And in this global marketplace and war for talent and for businesses, being a lot more forthright with that is definitely a priority that we need to focus on. So we're going to one of the questions that came in online or from the audience through the QR code was that there is a lot of new research on labor productivity that shows declines because managers and employees are dealing with high levels of bureaucracy and or regulation. So can you speak a little bit to what are some proactive policies and practices to help reduce some of that bureaucracy so that workers and all levels from entry to senior to top managers can focus on value creation? Any thoughts?
Well, I think this is important for business as it is for government. We want our department to run a lot more efficiently than it currently does. And one of the first things we did when we came into the department to lead it under Governor Walz was to say, you know, where are we slowing things down when it comes to processing grant applications, business processes? And we just took a holistic look at our pipeline for how we approve an organization for a grant or an incentive. And we struck out about 100 things in there that were sort of extraneous. And we were able to speed up our process to get money out the door at the agency by about 6 months, which is a good progress for us. I think we need to do more of that in government to make it easier for businesses to work with us. We have something called the Minnesota Business First Stop Coalition in our state that our agency leads, but it pulls in the DNR, it pulls in the Pollution Control Agency, a bunch of different agencies that touch the economy, that touch permitting. We're a state that does care about the environment and spends a lot of time making sure we have public engagement on permitting and other things. But we can also make it easier on businesses who are trying to do work in our state by giving them a concierge-like sort of experience as they work through the process that exists in Minnesota. So I think having that kind of customer-centric focus is really important. You know, Google, our mantra was focus on the user, and we're trying to bring that to government too. Focus on the business, focus on the job seeker as our customer, and try to build processes that work for them versus trying to defend yourself and be scared of transparency or innovation. I think government needs a culture that is willing to be nimble, and I think, quite frankly, the pandemic gave us an opportunity inside of government to really kind of embrace the crisis and accelerate a lot of the processes that for so long had been, so calcified. So I think this is a moment where every institution is rethinking bureaucracy and management. And you're right, a worker has to feel a sense of purpose in their job to want to be there. And if there's too much red tape or otherwise, they'll leave. So we think about this as a retention issue as much as anything else.
Great. Commissioner Luan.
Yeah, just to augment that, we offer, it's a full-scale concierge approach, kind of like what Commissioner Grove mentioned. And so when a company, whether it's an existing company or a new company approaches Commerce, instead of having them sort of navigate, at least in our agency, 6 different divisions, federal programming, you name it, or even just various parts of the state, what we do, especially given this large volume of projects, is we assign someone that literally walks them through everything. So for permitting, we're going to get you this person at the Department of Environmental Quality. You need water for your project. These are the folks you're going to meet with. I mean, so everything is basically curated based on that company's needs, from workforce programming to community-based programming to any economic development incentive, et cetera. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, though, that we do have probably half a dozen EDCs in this state that probably do as an effective, if not a more effective job than we do. As I look at Ryan here in the audience, but in reality, we're able to leverage those partnerships extremely well so that we can take that professionalism to the next level. And then when the state does need to get involved, we have the requisite people that'll work with them throughout all these programming efforts so that we don't have bureaucracy or any red tape really that would prohibit a project from coming to fruition. I'll also say last week we had our strategy review as an agency with the governor. He does this every 2 years to basically, what do the next 5 to 10 years look like? And right now I have like statutorily something like 17 pages worth of requirements. And my intent is to ask the legislature to reduce those to 3 bullets. That's it. I don't need 17 pages of statutory requirements to do our job at Commerce. So that will enable us to free up some more capacity so that we're no longer confined, if you will, to statute to perform functions that probably worked 15, 20 years ago. They don't work very well today. So literally 3 bullets is going to be our, or three statutory requirements.
Great, and I'd be remiss to say I'm very appreciative of the partnership that we as an organization have with both of your agencies, and I think it's one of those deals that as a 21-year chamber exec, I will tell you that I believe that there's a lot more opportunity to tap into and leverage the relationships that chambers and economic development corporations like ours here can do with the state, and looking forward to that. There was an audience question, or at least that's what my screen said, so I didn't see a hand, but it's really hard to see. Oh yeah, I see you dancing back there. Go ahead.
She's better at dancing than I am. So I was just curious if either of the panelists have seen the 60 Minutes thing on housing. It was just on this past weekend. If any of you haven't seen it, I would say it's a worthwhile visit out to YouTube and watch that segment. But anyway, they talked about all of the housing or single-family homes that are being bought up by corporations. And they had this talk with this guy about why it's being done. But I feel like the problem is bigger than that, and he kind of alluded to that. It's not just the corporations. And I agree with Kashkari's comment this morning, or Mr. Kashkari's comment, that we are the problem. We are at fault. We have to look in the mirror and say, why did we allow this to happen? And I don't think we can fix it without policy changes. But there are a lot of single-family homes that are being bought by investors. And so it's taking our young people, our younger generations are being choked out of the market because all of the single-family homes now are being bought up because there's no other investments in multifamily or whatever. I think in multifamily, the people expect to be paying rent, but there are no single-family homes to buy sometimes, or they're being outbid. My 28-year-old son is an example. He and his fiance were shopping for a home in the cities, put in a bid for $36,000 more. They were shopping about $300,000 range. They put in a bid for $36,000 over asking price, and they got outbid by a cash deal. So my comment is, can we fix this by policy somehow? That, how many homes do you need as an individual? Is it one? Is it two? We all live in Lakes country here, so having 2 homes is not out of the question, right? But do we need 3? Do we need 5, 20? What's enough? Especially in single-family homes. I can understand the multifamily and the apartments, but we are squeezing our young people out of the market.
Great. So housing is something we could spend a lot of time on, and I know the 1 minute 30-second mark is up. But can you each just briefly talk about some aspects that we need to look at from housing?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. From a North Dakota perspective, it's rural-based. The cities tend to take care of themselves pretty well. Supply demand, there's obviously an imbalance, but in the rural areas, that's the nut we're trying to crack, because that's probably the biggest constraint for growth for communities of 8,000 or fewer, is getting developers out there that can, especially given the input inflation that you've heard about several times already today. It's the same in the housing market for materials. So we can figure out the rural issue. I think we're going to do really well. I think the cities, the larger cities in the state, have a balance.
Yeah, I mean, the commissioner's right. It is an issue in greater Minnesota more so than the metro, although it is an issue across the state. I think we got to make some tough decisions. In talking with some of the local mayors last night at dinner, I think some communities have to be okay with multifamily housing being created in their communities. They have to be willing to look at new options for housing people. That's how the economy is going to grow. And I think to the commissioner's point a moment ago about main streets and their importance, this is critical. I mean, we've got to make greater Minnesota and rural North Dakota the best places to go raise a family in the country. And with increased access to broadband and the ability to do work from anywhere, that's one part of the equation. But another is our main streets themselves. And of course, everyone knows that downtown districts took a hit during COVID. We have about $80 million in our department right now focused on main streets across the state to revitalize them, really, to put money into developing those main streets so that people want to live in those regions. That will drive the housing market in more positive directions, because right now the economics don't work out so well in greater Minnesota for housing. So we've got to build communities that people want to come and raise their kids in. I'll just tell you, growing up in Northfield, Minnesota, about an hour south of the Twin Cities, I loved growing up in a small town. My dad had a small landscaping business. He sold a business and the shop that he worked in about 6 or 7 years ago to a person about my age who had 2 young kids and ran a furniture business, but wanted to do that from a smaller town, a small college town. And so he moved to Northfield with his family, was able to do so because he had a strong broadband connection, took over my dad's shop, is building furniture and shipping it to Manhattan and Long Beach and everywhere else, but gets to live that small town life in Northfield that he really cherishes. So these are the kinds of things that we need to encourage and make possible by investing in our main streets. And I think hopefully the housing market will follow if we can make some of the tough decisions on zoning that are, I think, critical to meet the need.
Great. So final question for each of you in 2 words. Tell us your thoughts on the economy.
We got so the last panel got 1 word. We get 2
we're
words?
gonna
Okay.
one up them. So we get 2 words, just because I said it.
Let's see. I would say inflection point.
Inflection point. Okay.
Accelerated innovation.
Accelerated innovation. All right. Please help me thank our both commissioners for joining us. All right, I'll turn it back over to Catherine for our final piece today.
All right. Well, it is getting to that time in the day. We don't have much time left. So we're going to keep rolling here this morning, but go ahead and grab more refreshments if you would like. But we have 3 more incredible industry leaders here with us today. So I want to be sure to hear from each of them. So please welcome Tiffany Lawrence, the interim president of Sanford Health, Bruce Newstead, the president of the Minnesota Retailers Association, and Rachel Lamostame, the executive director of the Midwest Manufacturers Association. All right, so we will do this just like the last one, where we'll do some brief remarks from each of our industry leaders and then jump into some questions. So we will begin this morning with Tiffany. So if you would like to take the stage.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Are you hanging in there? We've had lots of great speakers. I'm really happy to be here to represent healthcare on behalf of Sanford Health and just let you know what's kind of going on in our industry economically. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to any of you what I'm going to say because you've heard a lot of it already. Some real quick statistics for healthcare. 22 million of our workforce in the United States is in the healthcare industry. And as we look ahead between 2020 and going into 2030, it's going to grow by 16%. I think just an interesting fact, in the state of North Dakota, 30% of our population by 2030 is going to be over the age of 60. So the demand and the need is going to be great for healthcare. And just along with that, we're very labor intensive. It's a very high touch industry. And so when you look at Sanford Health just from an economic influx, just with labor income over the 4-state area that is our primary 4-state area, we have 38,000 employees and input about $2.8 billion of labor income into those markets where we're located. So how are we doing with workforce? Prior to the pandemic, I think we really felt like we were going to win this battle of the workforce, and then the pandemic hit. I would tell you that has created a lot of economic opportunity for workforce. We're seeing travel nurse support. I think you've heard a lot about it. That business has grown in the United States from about a $3.9 billion industry in 2015 to $11.8 billion in 2021. So we, not unlike other organizations, have had to use travel staff. We have about, at the end of March, we'll have 350 travel nurses on staff. That's down from 100 of our high. We were higher up to about 450. So we needed those staff in order to take care of our patients. It's been, the pandemic has also been really difficult on frontline staff. We have continued to support them, but a lot have decided to retire, leave the workforce. And it's just, it's a very, very trying time for those frontline workers and what they've had to face in taking care of patients throughout COVID, which has put a lot of strain and stress on our workforce. So what's our response? What are we going to be looking ahead for? What are we going to be trying to do? We're really deploying and enhancing more of what we've started and coming up with some new strategies. So, we continually work with our educational partners in North Dakota, Minnesota. Currently today, we only graduate about 400 nurses a year in that market. So I think similar to what I think Sean was saying in the IT industry, we're not graduating enough to fill the need. We could take all 400 of those students today. So what else are we trying to do? So obviously we're expanding our borders. Shannon talked about that. We've hired about 270 international nurses. We have 2 that are here so far. It's a very lengthy process. It takes over 9-10 months to get them through consulate, get them into the country, get them acclimated. But the best part about, hopefully, that we can see with bringing in our international nurses is they will be Sanford employees. They're not travel nurses. They're here for a 3-year commitment, but hopefully then we can keep them and they want to stay in our community and be a part of our community. So it's a really good strategy. I think we're really optimistic about it. And also, I think we heard a little bit about career academies, trying to get students interested earlier in health sciences, K through 12, working with career academies on sponsoring kids and trying to get them interested in healthcare. But it's not just frontline workers. We really have a dire need in back office, food service, environmental service, all of those other types of ancillary services that we see in healthcare. And we've got the pressure of the remote workforce. People want to be able to work remotely. And so we're really trying to get creative with how can we do that? How can we do that? How can we allow people that maybe don't touch a patient directly, but would like to have that opportunity and try and be competitive with all the other great opportunities that are out there, because obviously there's more opportunities out there than we have people to fill. So what's ahead? What's ahead for us? We're going to continue on those strategies. We'll continue to be here for acute and emergent needs, but healthcare will change in the future from a standpoint of trying to keep people well, keeping them out of the hospital, focusing on quality. Government regulation is going to change post-COVID. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in that regard, and we're going to see a lot of new technologies. As Sean was also talking about, telehealth, telemedicine, virtual health was a big driver during the COVID, and that's just going to expand and continue as we move forward. So in closing, we have a tough road ahead, but healthcare has changed a lot in the last 20 years, and it's going to change even more in the next 20. But I think we're committed. We're here to help and be here for our patients and our communities. And it's really my honor. I think we should just take a pause. The last 2 years have been very, very difficult for frontline staff. And so it's just my pleasure that I get to say thank you. And if we could just give everybody a round of applause for those people that have worked very, very hard over the last 2 years.
Thank you, Tiffany. Let's now go to retail with Bruce.
Well, thank you and good morning. Thanks to Shannon and Catherine and the Chamber team for putting this on today and for inviting retail to be part of the conversation. My name is Bruce Newstead with the Minnesota Retailers Association. As the name suggests, I work with retailers, about 1,200 storefronts across the state of Minnesota. And I love hearing the story of retailers. And here's what I love about retail. You come to a room like this and everybody is an expert, right? Because we are all consumers, right? We buy stuff. So I should do a Sean exercise. Everybody stand up and sit down if you bought something in the last 24 hours. But the reality is we're all consumers here. So you know retail just about as much as anyone else in the trends that are going on right now. I'm sitting here and I'm reminded retail is sort of the codependent industry. All the other industries you've heard of, we are dependent on them doing their job for us to be able to serve consumers. So it's an interesting industry. I work with about a third of my members are like national retailers, about a third are what I call regional retailers. They might have some stores in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and about a third are what we call Main Street retailers. And what we know about that industry is it represents in this area about 20% of our economy. So the velocity of the retail dollar, when you go and spend your money at a retailer, the velocity, that's about 20% in our economy. So our economy is really actually dependent on the success of retailers in our neighborhoods and our communities. I'm going to share with you just a couple stats here on jobs. So there's actually a fair number of people who work in retail, but a large number of retailers. You look at Minnesota and North Dakota alone, you know, you're looking at somewhere around 60,000 retailers between the two states. And we actually call a retailer anybody who sells something to someone. So raise your hand if you sell something to someone. You are a retailer. Retail today is not just brick and mortar. It's not just online. There's a lot of fusions. There's a lot of entrepreneurialism, and it's really a neat industry. There's a fair number of jobs in the Midwest here. I won't go through all of this, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics would love to tell you all about jobs. And what's interesting in Minnesota is we see jobs sort of flat in retail right now, and as you could probably guess from what you've heard a little bit about, part of that is a workforce issue. There's help wanted signs everywhere, right? We just can't find enough people to hire right now. So I'm not surprised by kind of a flat workforce trend in retail, because the piece of people being available is a major component of that. I'll skip some of the interesting things, but just take a look at retail jobs. What I want to point out here is that retail kind of in the Midwest mirrors the national retail picture. So every time I see a big stat that comes out and here's what's going on in retail nationally, I can look at Minnesota and I look at the Midwest, and we kind of mirror those trends. And so this is a great example of that. A few other things. I can't believe this is actually the first time you've seen a graph on inflation yet today. So I'm kind of proud that I'm the one bringing it to you. This is no surprise, right? Inflation is up, and it's up across the board, 8% over the last year, almost 1% over the last month. Not a big surprise. Here's what's been interesting for retailers. Usually when inflation hits, it will hit sectors of the retail space, and pieces of the pie will go up from a price perspective. As you well know, inflation is up across the board. Doesn't matter if you're buying a candy bar or a gallon of gas. You're seeing inflation. So the consumer is not really punishing retailers right now for inflation, because you, me, all of us, we understand that inflation is there and everybody's just trying to get through it. Couple other pieces that I want to share. This one is probably the biggest thing I'll share with you today. Disposable income is up. I mean, actually, just think of your own bank balance right now. Disposable income is up, and because of that, also spending is up. So we heard from President Kashkari this morning, a little piece on kind of government stimulus, how that has impacted the economy. Thank you to you. A lot of you have saved some of your stimulus and spent some of your stimulus. And we're so grateful for that, because that's actually what's kind of continuing to build on the momentum relative to consumer spending with retail. So you can see the stats on your screen. They are astronomical from a numbers perspective. And just to take a quick anecdote, I think Commissioner Grove from Minnesota mentioned that Minnesota has a $9 or $10 billion budget surplus. Every time we get a new revised forecast, consumer spending, sales taxes are above forecast, and that's because we're all actually doing a great job spending. I'd like to ask in a room like this, like, who bought a couch, a pool, or a dog over the last 2 years? And a lot of people will raise their hand. We have purchased things we just normally don't purchase. And as retailers, we're super grateful for that. So a couple just quick concluding pieces. You've talked about supply chains. Supply chains certainly impacting the retail community, but we're seeing a little less impact. Like we talked about it a lot over the holiday season. We're talking about it a little less because we're starting to see that kind of level out a little bit. Inflation, as I mentioned, everybody is expecting inflation, so nobody's punishing a retail in that area. The pandemic has actually caused bank balances to increase a little bit, and you're spending a little bit more money. So the pandemic has had some really interesting impacts on the industry. Geopolitics, I think we've actually covered this morning. Uncertainty is the enemy of an economy, but I will tell you, I spent $150,000 on a college degree in partial economics 20 years ago, and I think everything that Bruce P. Corey taught me in economics is out the door. All this stuff points to the fact that the consumer shouldn't be spending right now, but we are. So it's just an interesting phenomenon. Elections I like to mention not because I want to see who's a Democrat or Republican or who you're going to vote for, but elections are all about somebody saying either we're doing good, but we can do better, or somebody saying things are terrible. And sometimes that has an impact on consumer spending, but I don't think we're going to see that this year. And then we've talked a little bit about workforce and how that's mission critical for retailers. But these last 2 points are the ones that I kind of want to leave you with. Despite all the challenges, personal income and spending is really making a big difference for the industry. And if my prognostication for the Midwest over the next year or so is, I think consumers are poised to continue to spend as they have over the last 18 months, and we actually have the resources to do that. Quick national statistic, our friends at the National Retail Federation will tell you that they think retail is going to grow 6 to 8% this year. I think we'll see that trend in the Midwest as well. I want to end just with a quick thank you to all our government officials and those who make government their careers for your work during the pandemic for retailers. I want to thank our chambers of commerce that have been superstars in getting people to spend in our communities during the pandemic. We're super appreciative of that. And I want to thank you as consumers for spending. Keep doing it. That helps. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. Now let's go to Rachel to talk about manufacturing.
Hello and good morning. This is my first time ever in Fargo, so thank you to the Fargo Chamber. I fell in love with the city last night. This was fantastic, and I can't wait to come back to visit. I am here representing the Central Minnesota, Manufacturing Association, which we have manufacturers centralized in Minnesota all the way north to the Arrowhead, a little bit in the Dakotas, and in a bit of Wisconsin. So I kind of am the voice for manufacturing in northern Minnesota. After listening to all of our great panel members, I struggled to find some new information because we've all talked about inflation, workforce development, and the struggles that we've had since COVID. So I am going to talk about the future of manufacturing, but first let's look back at the year in manufacturing. A year ago today, actually, we started to really see some of the effects of the supply chain issues, that people were starting to feel this not just in manufacturing, but all over the United States. And then about 9 months ago, manufacturing saw a surge in demands. Sales went up, demand went up, but also the cost of raw materials went up. So what does that mean? In about 6 months, the pandemic hit, and COVID restrictions started to threaten what our manufacturers look like. Anybody with 100 employees or over started to panic. Would we be COVID testing everybody? Would we have to shut our plants down? Would we have to shut our facilities down? And this was something completely new and alien to manufacturers, as well as all other companies, but it hit manufacturing quite hard. And in that panic, a lot of capital spending came to a halt. And what were we going to do? Now, the reality of inflation and it has shaken up some manufacturers, but the demand is still there. However, the raw material costs are still up. By looking at the past, what do we see in our future? Manufacturing is very optimistic. Sales are up, exports are up, both in state and out-of-state exports. The Midwest exports into Canada have actually grown quite a bit. The manufacturers are forecasting an increased product lines, and most optimistic outlook is for the domestic opportunities that we are now seeing. Because we are getting less and less imports, we are looking to our own manufacturers within our own communities to fill that need. The struggles of manufacturers that continue to have is, of course, the cost of raw materials, a workforce shortage, which we've been talking about for the past 20 years, and it hasn't changed, and it only seems to be getting worse. And we've been talking about this for a very long time. However, our manufacturers are very optimistic. Even with the struggles our manufacturers have had and have been faced with, the statistics show at 86% are optimistic that we will continue to see growth in our numbers in manufacturing in 2022. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel. We are excited to now jump into some questions. So again, raise your hand if you have one, or send it in the QR code. I see a couple already coming in, so that's great. Let's start off talking about the pandemic. I think each of you touched on how that has impacted your industry and what it means for the future of your industry. Looking at retail, Bruce, you talked about the increase in retail and it's growing pretty drastically. So how do you see the future economy? What's the impact there?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, next 3 to 5 years, we're going to continue to see some growth, some good growth on the numbers. I think our challenge is, and I didn't talk about this, I think we're seeing margins squeezed. So I see a lot of retailers, doesn't matter if you're a national retailer or a Main Street retailer, really trying to hold prices down, stay competitive. So it's kind of a quagmire for retailers, because I think we'll continue to see sales grow, but I think we're going to see margins shrink a little bit. And that'll have some fallout in the industry. I mean, the great thing about the industry, it's pretty resilient. Most retailers stay with 2008, 2009, 2010, some tough online competition, now the pandemic. It's sort of an industry of survivors. So I think things will be fine. So again, we'll see some growth in sales, but some shrinking of margins.
Okay. And going over to healthcare, Tiffany, it is an absolute understatement to even say that the industry endured an incredibly turbulent couple of years. And thank you to you, your team, and anyone serving in healthcare for how they've handled the last couple of years with the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about the industry overall and how it's faring now coming out of the pandemic as we're emerging. What is it looking like for the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, kind of as I talked about a little bit, we are going to continue to struggle with workforce just from the demand side. We don't have enough workforce to meet the demand that's coming our way. But certainly, I think the most concerning thing, I think, for our healthcare workers post-pandemic is just their ability to kind of emotionally deal with what they've seen over the last 2 years. And so we've done a lot with our employee assistance programs and trying to help our staff really find their way back, to feeling comfortable, and after they've experienced some of the things they have on the front lines. So I think that's, it's just getting younger kids and other people back interested in the industry. But we are seeing some kind of positive things, just even with semi-retired folk wanting to come back into the industry and work a little bit part-time. So there's some shining, nuggets out there that I think post-pandemic that we're going to see some positive things that way. But we have a lot of work ahead of us in building our workforce. And, again, it's not only just the clinical side, but it's the technology side and the support areas that we're going to need into the future.
Absolutely. And talking about the next 5 to 10 years, hopping over to manufacturing and looking at what's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine and with sanctions, supply chain, how do you see that war impacting the economic stability right now and into the future?
Well, right now we haven't seen an actual effect yet because it's only a month in. Most companies still have a supply that they are in use of, but we will see those effects starting to happen in the next 2 to 3 months. And once that happens, it will be much like when South Korea couldn't produce the RAM that we needed for all of our technologies. There are going to be things that we did not foresee that aren't going to be imported anymore. We are going to have to look domestically to produce what is in lack of right now. That won't be imported.
Absolutely. Regarding retail, we have a question coming in from the audience that I want to get to you, Bruce. Can you address the foreseeable future and what it looks like for in-store retail? Will you see a recovery?
Oh, that is probably the $1 million question in the industry right now. Here's a pandemic upside. I think we all sort of realized the value of our community retailers and shopping in our community. I think, over the next few years, we're going to see some amazing shop local programs. Not that we didn't have them before, but I think consumers really understand, there's place for everybody in the marketplace. I can order online, but I'm still going to visit my brick and mortar Main Street retailer. So I think one thing we kind of forget sometimes here in the Midwest is, sometimes price is hard to compete on, sometimes availability being in the middle of the country, but the experience of retail is amazing to us. We really do we like to go out on a Friday night, downtown Stillwater in Minnesota, and walk the streets, hit the shops, have dinner, and kind of make, shopping in some ways is a little bit of our life. So I think that one thing, again, pandemic upside, it's sort of reminded us all, there's a great opportunity to shop local, be a part of our local community. So I think, you're always going to see cost pressures, you're always going to see pricing pressures, but I think we're going to see some nice viability of in-store retail, whereas, sometimes 5, 6, 7 years ago, there were some retailers you looked at and you thought, I'm not sure they're going to make it in today's marketplace. I think we're going to see some good thriving on the kind of retail in-store, physical retail store. Yeah.
Great, great. Is there any audience questions that we should turn to? All right, well, we'll just keep rolling. Then we have, let's talk a little bit about some workforce. So each of you discussed it a little bit. We know that there's a problem in workforce kind of across the board. Is there any creative solutions or innovative ways that you're working with universities or others to try to mitigate those staffing needs, or have you seen that in any of your industries? Whoever wants to go first.
I can start. We're partnering with all of our universities to work on, can we increase class sizes? So can we help partner and do that to kind of entice more students to want to get into the health sciences? We've also done some apprentice programs, which allows kids to start their program and actually work into their role over a period of time versus waiting, which it's very new, but that's something new that we're trying. So I think there's a lot of new and innovative ways. We're training some of our own from a medical assistant perspective. And so we have many internal programs. We have ultrasound tech programs, rad tech programs, all of those types of things as well. So just, always thinking outside the box and how can we partner up with all our great educational partners to make things happen.
Awesome. Bruce?
Yeah, I think retail's kind of interesting in that over the last 5 years, we realized something. Whenever we talk about retail jobs, we think of the person running the register. And we realized when you look at retail, there's a lot of great careers in these other industries. Talk about information technology. Retailers today, there's a nice path from the front of the store up into the career kind of corporate ladder relative to information technology, logistics. We talked about delivery this morning. So I think we're trying to do a better job to tell people, like, you know what, you might start out on the floor, but there are some career movements, and employers are willing to invest in their employees today to help them move up, especially given the workforce challenges. So that's one piece. The other piece that we're really trying to work with some of our partners on is retail is actually still a great first career and end of career job. It actually matches up with a lot of people relative to where they are in the phases of their life. So we're trying to get that word out there as well. Again, I know everybody's competing for that same person, but as an industry, we're trying to do a little bit better job saying, you know what, there's lots of opportunities, not just this one you think of.
Thank you. Rachel?
So in manufacturing, we talk about the skilled trades. And right now there's a really, well, I shouldn't say right now. Over the past 20 years, there's been a big push in the pre-collegiate ages in going into schools K through 12, the grades, and really trying to push for a non-4-year college. We are looking for the skilled trades to come out of high school, get a certificate, do some apprentice work. It does not have to be a 4-year college. And the work that we've been doing within the schools has been kind of groundbreaking. That hasn't been done before, where companies are coming in and partnering with schools to teach kids in the VEX robotics industries, the carpentry industries, and any trades that can be taught within school that's easily transferable into the workforce and into a 2-year college.
Yes, and all of you touched on a little bit, but the partnerships within the communities of the different associations as well as the individual companies is obviously very powerful. And I know Commissioner Grove spoke a little bit about the Moorhead Career Academy. I know Cass County is working on one, and as we look across the Midwest, there's other examples of that as well. I know the Chamber is taking to it with our Ignite program. So I know there's a lot of people that are working on this workforce issue. So it's great to hear that your businesses and organizations are also partnering with a lot of these associations across the Midwest too. I want to talk a little bit about what President Kashkari was talking about this morning, and as we heard of the recent federal rate increase. Tiffany, talking to you first in the healthcare industry, how is being one of the largest in the economy as healthcare is, how will that recent and any potential future rate increases impact the ability for the sector to expand in the future of the economy?
Well, I think it's kind of a multifaceted question, but you know, I think it's the rate hikes are meant to slow the economy just a little bit. I think it really will depend on the performance of healthcare. I think I talked a little bit about we're going to have, I think, some more government regulation or changes in payment policy. And again, it's a very small margin industry, and so when those margins decrease and or our performance decrease, that could make borrowing in the bond market a little bit more difficult, or those rates would be higher. But I think we're all in the same kind of boat post-pandemic, and so I think the jury's still out. I don't think we know exactly how the industry will fare now as we go 12 to 18 months post-COVID, and how we will financially perform with some of our operating costs being higher, the inflation impacts and some of those things. So it could definitely have a slowing impact on some growth, for sure.
Okay. Bruce, kind of moving over to you to talk in a little bit of a different way about coming out of the pandemic, thinking about all of the influx of dollars that have gone into the pockets of citizens, either through coming down from the states or the federal, how do you see that impacting the ability to spend right now, and how long do you think that can last? What's the sustainability of this?
Right. I think I would have told you about a year ago that people were spending a lot of their stimulus, and once it was gone, that spending would slow down. But I actually think people saved about half of it and spent about half of it. So I think we're going to see kind of a return on investment, if you will, on stimulus dollars for the next year or so. So I think people kind of, one, they spent less money, right? You went on less trips, you banked more money, you spent some of your stimulus. I think we're going to continue to see some of the positive impact of those stimulus dollars over the next year, year and a half. And just really quick, back to your last question.
Yes.
Because if I was driving away, I'd feel bad if I didn't thank the bankers and the financial services in the room. You know, back to the tying kind of supply chain and interest rates together, a lot of you have been really good to your retailers in your community. What we have done is we've bought more product than we would have normally because we were worried about the supply chain. And there was a point at which I would have said, gosh, I'm worried that retailers are going to have access to capital. But a lot of you took risk and worked with your retailers to make sure they could buy enough for the holidays, into the spring season and into the summer season. So just a quick thank you to all of you in that industry for kind of taking the risk with retailers and making sure they were getting access to the funds they needed to buy a little bit more inventory.
That's a great call out. Thank you, Bruce. Rachel, thinking about either of those two topics, the federal rate increase as well as the stimulus dollars, how have those affected the manufacturing industry, and what are you seeing moving forward into the future?
Sure. We were at first seeing the uptick before the increase of raw materials, the uptick in capital spending. And now that inflation has hit, we've seen a decrease in that because of the unstable future that we have in our materials. However, we've seen a growth in automation. And before, like was already stated, but before that used to be a scary thing. That the automation of our jobs, people are going to be losing out. Well, that's not the fact, because we don't have people to fill those jobs. So the uptick in automation, that has been a very exciting innovation within the manufacturing realm.
Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to see across industries how technology can be weaved throughout all of them and how it will affect the economy of each of your industries. Any comments on how you see technology impacting? I know we talked a little bit about healthcare and telemedicine. Any of that that you're seeing will have a big impact on the economy moving forward as we emerge that?
Well, I think we're seeing just delays in our capital purchases from a standpoint of, again, availability of what we're being able to get in. It's taking 12 months to get a MRI scanner. So it's, some of those things are just impacting the pace of technology coming in, but also everything within healthcare now is technology. There's something related to technology with it. So it's here to stay, and it'll be an everyday impact to what we do in healthcare, for sure.
Bruce or Rachel, anything on technology?
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about autonomous delivery and just kind of fancy, neat things. Like Amazon, you would walk out of the store without actually checking out. Those are neat things that are still a little ways off. I think where we're seeing some really neat technology stuff right now is in the area of analytics. You have retailers that didn't used to analyze shopping patterns, but they've got a new point of sale system, and it allows them to have access to some data. So we're seeing some really cool things in analytics, just helping a retailer make better decisions today. So I'll say that's a big technological upside versus 10, 20 years ago.
Rachel.
The innovation in automation and things like CNC machining and 3D printing, there are things that we wouldn't have even thought we could do 10 years ago and that are a reality now. It's just exploding, and it's so exciting to see all the new products coming to light from, say 3D printing, from medical devices all the way up to car parts. It's just exciting to see not only where we've come, but where we're going to go.
Awesome. Well, we only have about a minute left, so I have a few quick questions to get through here. So if we can answer this one in like 10 seconds or less. I know it's going to be hard. I want to know, what do you think, what stage of the COVID recovery is your industry in right now for economic recovery from COVID? Bruce, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, no, I started to shake my head because I think there's a little bit of a disparity in the industry right now. You have, kind of a third. You have a third that didn't do so well and they're really struggling for recovery. You have a third that did well and they're continuing to do well, and then you've got this mushy middle. So I would say we're kind of in a solid recovery phase with a little touch of uncertainty.
Okay. Rachel?
Of course, we're uncertain, but coming out of the pandemic, we look good as long as there isn't an uptick, because in manufacturing, working with so many people in a small area, that could close down an entire facility, and as we've seen in some sectors, that can be devastating. So hopefully we're on our way out and that won't be an issue anymore, but it is always on, in the back of our minds as manufacturers, what if there is an uptick?
And Tiffany?
We're actually happy to say that, we have fewer patients in the hospital, and we're almost, to that point where we can say maybe we don't have any COVID patients in the hospital. So I think our memories are still pretty keen on what has happened in the last 2 years. So I'd say we're cautiously kind of coming out of it and looking to the future and what is our new normal. But definitely, we're still kind of making our way out of that COVID.
All right, great to hear where you're at in the recovery. Last question to close things off. Shannon allowed 2 words, so we'll go with 2 words for this one. All things considered, workforce, supply chain, everything that's going on internationally, what one or two, I'll let 2, but 1 or 2 words would you use to describe the future of the economic outlook for your industry? Tiffany?
Cautiously optimistic.
All right, Bruce?
I would say opportunistically optimistic.
Okay, Rachel?
Well, I'll piggyback off that. I would say optimistic and, innovative.
All right. Well, optimistic is the word of the day. That's a great note to end on. So let's give our speakers one more round of applause. Thank you. Now, as they head off the stage, I have the pleasure of introducing our final speaker for the morning, Dr. Scott Beaulier. Scott is the Ronald and Kay Olson Dean of Business at North Dakota State University. An economist by training, Scott has spent his career understanding and advocating for policies that foster dynamic, vibrant economies that best allow businesses and entrepreneurs to thrive. So please welcome to the stage, Dr. Scott Beaulier.
Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you all for sticking with us this morning. Really excited to spend a few minutes with you. Especially thankful to Shannon and Katie for giving me a chance to get out of my bubble, which is leading a team of about 60 professors, managing a school of 1,700 students, and getting to nerd out with you for a few minutes. I get to look at data, get to provide a forecast of what's happening for the economy, and a real honor to bookend an event that we had Neel Kashkari here for this morning. I watch the Federal Reserve as an economist quite often. I think we're very blessed to have Neel, probably the best president of all Federal Reserve banks, here overseeing our district. So what a delight to be here and to have him here this morning. So just real quickly, I want to run through a number of slides with you. This is going to be fast and furious, and then we'll get into some Q&A. Things that I'm seeing as I look at the economy right now. Very important to preface this a little bit with the great American philosopher Yogi Berra. Okay, so Yogi has this quote that it's really tough to make predictions conversations, especially when they're about the future, all right? I was going to come with an economics quote. Okay, so you know why there are economists, why the world has made economists? To make weather forecasters more accurate, okay? So I'm going to do my best. I put my finger in the air this morning, all right? It was a little bit windy, and we're going to see where this goes in terms of how the economy's looking. We heard from Neil. I think that much of what I'm going to say is going to dovetail with him, but there are things to be looking at and be worried about, and to kind of build on what he said as to what should we do and what should we be paying attention to as we go ahead through the next year. So first, just a couple of bits of good news. This is the best news of the economic recovery. Neil was highlighting this. He said there was an abyss. We had to throw everything in the world at it, and we in fact did that. Here in America, we did that better than anywhere in the world, and I'll talk about why that's a little bit concerning. Okay, James earlier said we threw a bazooka at the problem, and we truly did, but the problem was pretty severe. This is a chart of job loss in America. You all remember this, sitting at home, not having a clue what was going to happen. This was March of 2020, all right, that you see the great abyss there, and then shortly after March of 2020. Good news, by the way, 2 years ago today, the stock market bottomed for its pandemic bottom. Quite a miracle in terms of gained ground since that bottom, all right? One other good news fact for you all this morning. I'm from Gen X. Gen X is currently 50% above where baby boomers were at this period of their life. So I'm about 45. Baby boomers at 45 would be less than us by, well, not 50, we're about 50% ahead of them in terms of net worth at the same time. The even better news is millennials at age 25 right now have passed Gen X for the first time in terms of net worth. So this generation behind us that we're terrified by is actually doing pretty okay, all right? They'll be just fine. The kids are all right, okay? This is probably the best news that I have for you all this morning, is that we recovered from the pandemic faster than anyone could have imagined. These are past recessions. All of these other lines are past recessions. This is a miracle that we pulled off in terms of how quickly we pulled the U.S. out of a Great Depression that was worse than the Great Depression in terms of job loss and unemployment. You all remember the really awful times. We got out of it. But there was a downside to getting out of it. We spent more than just about anyone else in the world, okay? So I'm gonna skip this 1970s all over again, because I get asked that all the time. If you wanna ask me about it, we can get into it in Q&A. It's kind of like the 70s, but it's kind of not, okay? And I wanna talk about spending here in the United States, because we can talk all day about what's causing inflation. Is it supply chain? Is it human greed? Is it all of these other forces that are responsible for it? But it all comes back to just how much money is circulating in the economy. And there's two key drivers of this circulation. Fiscal spending, which is all of the stimulus we received, all right? My mother, who's retired, would call me from time to time, and she's like, I logged into my account this morning, and there was a check just there. And it was happening like over and over, like it was growing on trees. And this is how we recovered from that job loss slide you saw before, is we were handing out money, not even looking at who it was going to. She's comfortable, didn't really need it, but she got it just like most of us did during the Great Recession. All of that spending added up and tabulated leaves the United States way up there in terms of total spending as a percent of GDP. In fact, only a couple of countries are ahead of us in the amount we spend, France and Malaysia. A lot of others took more cautious approaches. We truly did throw the bazooka at it. So there's the fiscal bazooka, and then Neil was part of the monetary bazooka that I'll talk about in just a minute as well. What did all this spending lead to? Really high inflation. Here's the problem with saying it's a supply chain issue, or America is especially greedy. There's a bunch of other countries that have not had the kind of inflation that the US has had, okay? They have the same supply chain bottlenecks, they're facing the same energy prices that we are, but they're enjoying tame inflation in comparison. Japan, Switzerland, France. In fact, unless you go to emerging economies, which have inflation rates that are all over the place, there's only a few developed economies that have higher inflation than us. So I used to live in Alabama. We used to say better than Mississippi all the time. The United States right now, when it comes to inflation, can say better than Russia, okay? And we'll take that right now, especially given global turmoil. Part of the driver of all this inflation is what we have done with our money supply, okay? So back in 2008, everyone in this room probably remembers the 2008 crisis. TARP was a $700 billion program, okay? Trillions are the new millions, right? And trillions are just something that was happening every couple of months during the pandemic. So we dealt with a pandemic that was extremely scary and we had to throw everything at it. But we treated it with a massive dose of medicine that was kind of like, hey, 2008, hand me your beer, all right? Like, you can't believe how much stimulus we're going to throw at this. So now the Fed has this problem of they have put about $10 trillion onto their balance sheet that they're not sure what to do with, okay? And all of that, in addition to raising interest rates, is a source of uncertainty for markets right now. And as the great Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman's famous for saying, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So you can talk about supply chain shocks, you can talk about oil. It really is about the amount of money we put in the system. And all of that money is leading to a lot of really high prices. Here are some of the percent changes in the last year here in America. Gasoline, up 25%. If you're into a caveman diet, okay, it hasn't been very good to you, okay, 13% year over year if you like to eat meat and eggs only. If you're a vegetarian, like my wife, 8%, so she's not real happy right now either. Electricity, 9%, furniture, 17%, women's dresses, 14%. You think that renting's like a great escape right now, maybe 20% year over year for two-bedroom rental apartments nationally. So we've done this to ourselves, okay? We've inflicted this harm, and we kind of know it, all right? We had to save ourselves from a mess, and now we're reaping, the other side of that. A poor me story, I like to go up to the Boundary Waters in the summertime, canoe, see if my kids can tip the canoe and terrify their parents, just do things, get chased by mosquitoes. We like to canoe all day and then shower in the evening as opposed to like camp out. 2 years ago, you remember 2 years ago in the summer, everyone was trying to get to the Boundary Waters because it was like one of the safe places you could go. Like you could go be in nature. 2 years ago, the price of this place, exact same one, was $230 per night. $505 this summer, okay? And I would say there was more demand 2 years ago, okay? Because everyone was trying to get somewhere out in nature. This summer, $505. What's driving that? It's no supply chain issue in the Boundary Waters. It's the same place. There's a lot of people who want to be in tents as opposed to like lodging, and it's almost double the price, okay? So that's like the real effect that you all are seeing. There's people who are taking pictures of gas station prices all over the country. California is over $7. I was in Buxton, North Dakota yesterday, $3.89, all right? So we're doing okay on that front, but they're high compared to what we're used to. A lot of other things are going up, and I'm going to show you one chart after another. There's a lot of UND people in this room. Hockey stick after hockey stick here in terms of what these charts look like. This is the Case-Shiller U.S. National Home Price Index at an all-time high, both in nominal and in real terms. Okay, so if you control for time and inflation over time, it's at an all-time high. So housing's looking pretty darn bubbly. This is an index. So I have a hobby. I like to walk around with my kids and say, guess that price in our neighborhood. Okay, so like we walk around and I'm teaching my kids about housing. Like I have 4 kids, 3 of them are kind of learning about supply and demand. And we walk around and it's like, how much do you think that house is? And they're getting better and better at it, okay? But you go to Zillow then and find out what the actual value or the perceived value is. And they're off every time. They think houses should be worth a lot less than what Zillow is saying. In fact, more than 50% of houses right now are going for more than asking price nationally, okay? So the old school rule was, whatever they're asking, offer 85% of it, or offer 90% of it. Now it's offer full with cash, and then hope and cross your fingers and do some kind of like little dance, all right? Like hope you can get it at full value price. More than half of homes are below 50%. This is not normal. Look at the chart. There's a long period where this was not happening, and it's happening all the time. Houses not coming on the market, lots of word-of-mouth exchanges. In fact, the housing market right now is heavily tilted on this index, which is buy versus rent, heavily tilted towards rent. So if there's a way for you all to unwind, this is little financial advice. If you can get out of your house, it's probably the best time to do it ever. The problem is these are really difficult things to unwind from, right? Like, okay, thanks, nice advice. I'm gonna have to pack everything up, deal with 6% commission costs, and then find something else and buy something else. Kind of hard to short, okay? But if you're thinking about buying, it's probably the worst time ever to buy a house, okay? Rent is expensive. You just saw up 20%, but in relative terms, renting has never been better compared to buying. So we've inflicted a lot of this on ourselves, and it's sector after sector, industry after industry. This is the used vehicle market. I have a colleague who was really excited, wanted to trade in his Ford Focus because he could get $8,000 for it. Looked and realized there was absolutely nothing as an alternative. So he's riding his Ford Focus and really happy that it's like subjectively valued at $8,000, okay? The used car market is a complete mess. Again, blame it on supply chains, blame it on chips, blame it on ourselves too, okay? And that's a big part of what's going on in that market. The stock market, only twice before has it ever been at as high a level as it is right now, right? Stock market, I'll talk a bit more about this in a second, has become extremely volatile in recent days as well. So this is a 10-year CAPE metric, which is used for valuing stock markets. The US S&P 500 has only been this high twice before. Black Tuesday in 1929 and the year 2000. Anyone remember 2000? I do. I was into the stock market then, like a lot of my students are. It was really fun. And then I lost all my money because you shouldn't have been in the stock market if you were an undergraduate student, okay? This is what we're facing right now when you look at financial markets too. Inflation expectations, which Neil talked about this morning a little bit, have also began to skyrocket. And this is very concerning because if you expect inflation, our retail presenter just before me was talking about this, like you're still spending, and that's interesting. One reason people spend is because they anticipate it being even more expensive in the future. And we're starting to see signs of that, like, I better get it now because it's like hot potato. In the future, it's gonna be even more expensive. So you mix all of this together, and the economy is still running extremely hot. But here's the big worry. We have the three key indicators in place for really messing it up. So the economy is red hot, prices are red hot, you are struggling to find employees, unemployment's at 3.5%, and we're at risk of really messing that equilibrium up. And here's why. One, these are the three common causes of recession. Exogenous shocks, like pandemics, like war, okay? And there's a war that has created a whole new element of uncertainty upon us right now. Two, really goofing up policy. So not doing the right thing when you're facing some kind of crisis or exogenous shock. And three, the Federal Reserve getting it wrong. We heard Neil today, fabulous, intellectual, really smart guy. He's talking about, we really hope we soft land this. But in all of his commentary, that's probably where he was like the most cautious. Like, we hope so, okay? We hope that we can do this, but we might get it wrong. And in fact, the leading cause of recessions historically in the US has been the Fed. So we have the Fed there to provide the bazooka, and then we have the Fed there to do whatever the opposite of the bazooka is, okay? Like, have it boomerang back on us, okay? I'm not sure what the metaphor is, but these are the three leading causes. All three factors are there right now, and that's what's quite worrisome for economists. A few things for you to be watching. If you look at the history of recessions, new home sales is a really important one. They're down, despite the economy being red hot. New home sales are down 8% year over year right now. If they get to falling to the 15 to 20% range, look out. Housing drives so much of our economy, and housing is the pathway through which we're basically spreading money into the economy. If that falls by 20% or more, we're probably headed for a recession. Oil prices were already there. They've doubled in the last year. Every time oil prices double in a year, it's essentially a strike price that a recession is coming. So we've hit that thanks to Ukraine and Russia, okay? Three, the yield curve is very close to inverting. You all talked about that with Neil this morning. Maybe we can talk about it more in a minute. Heavy truck sales, kind of a strange metric, but another really key indicator of economic activity. And then the VIX is indicating volatility in financial markets. 2 years ago, almost to the day, the VIX was at exactly the same level as where it was 2 weeks ago. You know what was happening 2 weeks ago? Vlad was talking about nukes. okay? There was Chernobyl uncertainty, like, gosh, he might be trying to like take over Chernobyl and just knock it out and just create like a nuclear mess for us. 2 years ago, what was the VIX going crazy about? It's a volatility measure on markets. COVID, okay? So we are back to levels of volatility that indicate that people are really nervous about the state of affairs in the US right now. Implied volatility of financial markets for each day right now is 2%. So every day you wake up and you're like, huh, the Dow's up 600. That's normal, but it could be down 600 in a couple of minutes because within day volatility is 2% per day right now. And that's what the VIX is saying. So things are really kind of shaky right now in terms of what we're expecting from financial markets. Last slide here, we're going to finish with a Yogi Berra, the future ain't what it used to be, a philosophical quote. A few things to take away as you're looking at the year ahead. Lots of uncertainty. Be careful because we've had just a really good run and it's easy to take for granted past success. I had someone yesterday telling me about their endowment return for the last year, 36%. It's like, wow, 36%. And then they're starting to say, if we could just keep doing 12, that'd be really great. 12 is nowhere near historical normals, okay? But we've adjusted our normal up so far. You're about to be disappointed. So a few things to be keeping in mind as you think and try to navigate inflation. Inflation's 7.9% now. Thanks to this Ukraine mess, it'll be close to 9% next month, year over year. It'll be up close to 9. If you're not making 9%, in terms of pay raises, you're falling behind. That's really a lovely way to end this today, isn't it? Like, if you're not making 9%, you've fallen behind. I'm a state employee, I get a 2% raise this year. I've really fallen behind, okay? And I'm sure a lot of you are like doing the same math, like, gosh, that stinks. Number two, some sectors will benefit greatly. There are some things happening in North Dakota where we stand in relative terms to do very well, okay? Oil and ag, which have been talked about already. Housing remains extremely bubbly nationally, and that's even true locally. I'm over in the historic part of town. It's all word of mouth exchange. Like, you know, I don't need to list. I know I can post it on Midtown Fargo, and it'll sell in a couple of hours, okay? That's a really bubbly market, if that's the kind of behavior you're seeing, and it's here and exists locally. State finances are something that we've come through, thankfully, in extremely great shape. There was so much bazooka money thrown at state finances that you have states that never talk about surpluses talking about returning money. California has been in chronic deficit my entire life, and they suddenly had surpluses, and they were handing out money to people. That's pretty amazing. So it's a good thing that we have if indeed things are going to get bad. Last thing is, if you thought workforce issues were frustrating in the current moment, they're probably about to get a lot worse if inflation really is headed even higher from here. It means you're going to have to pay more, and you're going to have to embrace more flexibility for your workers, because that's a form of payment, okay? And that's a big correlation with inflation, is you have to be more flexible as employers. Bottom line, this is actually just kind of the beginning. It's the beginning of the end of the pandemic, and it's the beginning of the end of really cheap money. They always end, pandemics and cheap money, but when they do, look out. Okay, so real cheerful. I actually am a very optimistic person. I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, and baseball just started, okay? So everything's gonna be fine, but it's not so great at this exact moment. Thank you very much. Happy to take a few questions. Thanks.
Well, on that happy note, I hear that's going to be sunny later today.
54.
Yeah, exactly. It is that time of year. It was 70 degrees in Maple Grove over the weekend, and I left yesterday. There was a half an inch of snow on the ground. So yes, we live here because we're optimistic. We have a little bit of time left, so I want to get to some real hot topics that fall in a lot of line with what your closing comments. Here in the upper Midwest, especially here in North Dakota, and I may or may not be asking for a family member who farms outside of Kandu, this Ukrainian situation, the commodities that come out of the Ukraine, wheat and soybeans in particular, you know, they're bombing ports, they're bombing buildings, they're bombing shopping centers, hospitals. What is that going to do? And for North Dakota farmers, South Dakota, Minnesota farmers, what potential does that have for us? I mean, is there a boom market coming? Are we going to see soybean prices that we've never seen before? And is that an opportunity for our farmers to go back and retool literally this week and, plant an extra 1,000 acres a week.
I thought the comments this morning were actually quite accurate. So your immediate instinct is to say this is going to be really good for us because you're seeing wheat prices at 14-year highs. You're seeing other crops at historically never seen before highs, but everything else is high too. So the gentleman this morning, Mr. Sinner, I think, really hit it on the head. All the inputs are rising as well. So it's not completely clean on, yep, we're going to just gain from this. If Ukraine cannot get a crop in the ground, it's tremendously awful for humanity. It's horrible for Europe, and I think Europe really takes it on the chin relative to the US if that happens. And in fact, they're hurting a lot more from their natural gas problems right now too. So we've had higher natural gas this winter. My energy bill's been twice what it was last year. In much of Europe, it's 4 or 5 times higher than a year ago. And I think they're the ones to stand to lose. There might be some gain here, but I don't think it's like clear cut, yep, oh, prices are going up, we win. The fertilizer discussion this morning was spot on, not obvious that we win. Energy, maybe you get some more risk taking and some more activity there. I think state revenues will be very healthy because revenues are based on like the price of the unit. And so as a state employee, it's like happy times.
Well, and it leads into your other, speaking of state and federal spending, one of your, especially particularly interesting areas of your research is around federal spending, or state spending, I should say, government spending, and then how that impacts lives, whether it's professional, whether it's personal. How do you see, the 3 or 4 different rounds of spending? You alluded to it a little bit, but how do you see that going forward? Because I like the end of your chart. I wish I had that when I was in office, that pandemics and surpluses do come to an end.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Is it a gradual tapering off? Should we try to do Build Back Better, whether it's the skinny version or the original version?
So I think that much of the spending during the pandemic was, it's unfortunate that we put so much in that can be considered inefficient or wasteful. I would have liked to see a lot more go into actually tackling COVID, trying to help frontline workers, putting more into testing. We were a disaster as a country with testing relative to a lot of others. And instead we just said anyone making under 175,000, you get a check. Most people making 175 don't need a check, quite honestly. It wasn't means tested. My mother's doing just fine. The money that went to states as well, states have these surpluses that are just inconceivable. That's not something you normally see. And it all was this byproduct of let's just throw money at everything. And I think that has now soured this political moment on trying to help with whatever may be next. So I look at a lot of the infrastructure and say, this smells like just throwing a lot of ornaments into an already hot economy. Spending more right now, there was something out this morning, if gas prices if oil stays over $100 a barrel, then you get a $100 check, every American. It's like, really? Like, at what point are these things really going to move the needle on the economy that's still hot?
Well, and that is, so that you do a good job at this. It's almost like you do this for a living. Leading into that next question is, what is how do you then either slow up or speed down? I mean, President Kashkari's discussion of rates, and the one question is, should we just rip the Band-Aid off and go 3% and call it good? Well, that's a little bit, so what is there, and I say that for North Dakota, but also for the upper Midwest, because I think we are a unique opportunity. Yeah, when I was in office, we'd always make fun of California, the left coast and the far left coast in New York and California. They could never balance a budget, and now they're balanced. Or should we be afraid of that here in the Midwest?
So on the issue of what do you do, I think that Neil knows this, and the Fed is very aware of their situation, which is they're behind the curve. And if you go fast, you can show that you actually weren't in tune with where you should have been. And that's you have to own that. We had an own that moment that some of you may remember in the late 70s and early 80s. Paul Volcker had to whip inflation, and it wasn't pretty. Interest rates had to come up to almost 22% to deal with an inflation that was running at 18 or 19%. It may take just a lot more bad medicine. There's a lot of economists who think that the rate right now shouldn't be 0.25%, it should be about 4%. So even if we do all the hiking this year, it's not enough. The market rate, so there's a Fed funds market, and they tell you where the rate ought to be. And it's traders and people who are putting money on the line, and they think it should already be at about 1.5, and we're at 0.25. So there's real concern that we're behind the curve, and what that yield curve is saying is there's a risk that we've we're really going to mess this up in trying to work ourselves out of it.
Right. Going too fast or too slow. Yeah, like my kids are getting all their homework done the night before. You know, do your homework as you build up to it. I'll use that lesson later on. The budget surpluses are that next pie. Minnesota's sitting on almost $10 billion. North Dakota's got a couple of billion here, a billion here, a billion there. Federal government's trying to spend trillions. And this is going to sound odd, but it's hard to spend that amount of money in that short amount of time. What do you see happening when all the money is passed and it's there to be spent, but people can't find either a project or the right thing to spend? What do we do with all that money that's spent? Or I shouldn't say, it's allotted, but not spent. So it's sitting there, but it's not being spent. Do we just pull it all back, or do we let it sit there for how long and before it gets moldy and the the used by now price date comes up?
Yeah, it's a good question. At the federal level, I think that there's a bigger issue that Neil was mentioning of we have massively overspent, and that problem's likely to get worse thanks to the entitlement bomb that we all face. Just a lot of people retiring, not as many replacing. When it comes to a lot of these state appropriations, I think it's raising an interesting question on I don't know that every state is going to do the same thing, but do we really need to be taxing as much as we are? Or are we, where is all of this surplus coming from? And should we be building up rainy day funds? Or, a lot of states have full rainy day funds now too. So it's like, what are we doing with this surplus? And it should lead to some interesting ventures into here's what the state has always needed, and maybe we ought to do it now, and we'll see it. But it's going to be state by state in terms of how it's handled.
Yeah, it's and having been in that role, okay, if we spend it now and then all of a sudden the revenues do drop off, now we got to go back and have a tax increase. And yeah, nobody, for the folks in the audience, that's still not popular in politics. The other question I want to do in our time left here is the workforce, the new normal. President Kashkari talked a lot about it. We've heard it from a number of chamber members. And what is that new normal? Being from the Twin Cities, I have neighbors that have no intention of going back down to Minneapolis. Downtown Minneapolis, I'm never going to go back down there again. Up here, completely different world market. How do you see that affecting? What is the new normal? Is it a hybrid, 2 days a week in the office, 3 days, or in towns like Fargo and Sioux Falls, we're all going back? It's just like it was prior pandemic.
I think the new normal is a normal with extreme empathy from whoever the employer or the owner is, and actually listening to people and saying, I value you, you're really important, and I know that I can't lose you because it's extremely expensive and you're hard to replace. What do you need? And it's going to take more time to figure out what unique employee needs are, and then balancing it so that there's consistency across your operation. But employers, this has been a theme all morning, employees have tremendous leverage right now, and they'll continue to enjoy that for a while. And that probably means flexibility in some places. It means bonuses and getting creative about salary packages. So it's more money for everyone in the room. But just think, that money's been inflated, so it's not as much, right?
Yeah, the 8 to 9%, I'm going to go back and talk to my boss about my review time's coming up. Well, I want to thank you, Doctor. It's been great. To all of our panelists, to everyone who comes. I know Shannon and Catherine are going to come and finish, but thank you so much. If we need to get a hold of you, read your good work, see you speak at an opportunity, where do we find you online?
I work at NDSU. I'm around town. Come on over to Barry Hall. Sons of Norway is across the street. It's Pi Day. I love to visit with you also. You can find me, I'm sure. Yep.
Great. Well, we appreciate that. The resources that are available here today, this is not a moment in time. This is continuing. These summits are going to continue. So I really appreciate you coming today. We appreciate that. I'll turn it back over to Shannon and Catherine.
Thanks a lot. Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
All right. Wow. That was a jam-packed morning with really great content, really great speakers. Thanks for sticking with us. We know it was a long morning, but just a couple of closing remarks. First and foremost, thank you so much to all of you for attending. Thank you to our sponsors who continue to support the work that we do each and every day. To our co-hosts, our 24 chambers all across the Midwest, we really love the fact that we can partner with 24 other chambers to do this work. And so we look forward to all of that in the future. I have to say, we couldn't do any of this without a killer staff. So thank you. Maybe a round of applause for my team. So final, and then obviously a thank you to all of our speakers. It was so great to have the diversity of industry and thought leaders up here. That's what makes our economy, and that clearly is what makes our community. So a couple things on your tables you probably saw, also with QR codes, because we make this so easy. We know many of my other colleagues in our other communities that we're in the midst of election time, and this is a really critical time as we are electing our leaders that help to make all of these laws, that implement all of these bills. And so we've got some really big candidate forums coming up. We have 5 cities that we represent, and those 5 cities all have elections that we're looking at. But the one that you'll see on your table is Fargo and West Fargo's upcoming city and commission debates. On the flip side, you'll see the remainder of our Midwest summits. As I mentioned, we started this back in June with our first energy summit with 13 chambers. Now we have 24 chambers at this one for the economy. The next one will be our ag summit. And then our cybersecurity IT summit followed and finishing off the year with our energy summit. So we really hope to see you at some more of these. We think that the content is really relevant. And if you've got any ideas and speakers for us that you've heard in these topic areas, that would be really great. We're really open to that feedback as well. So, but more than anything, we are very blessed to be here in the Midwest. We have a great, robust economy and clearly demonstrated by significant growth. Yes, there are challenges, but together, when we show up for things like this and we voice our opinions, we can get through those challenges and continue to thrive and prosper. I wish you all a very prosperous day. Thank you again for joining us.